We do have thoughts about things, but whatever you guys decide, and then you can come to us and then we can implement a lot of it. Like, you know our feelings.
What did you think of it? What did you say?
What did you say next year? Right, because the other solar charge.
Yeah, not far away. Yeah, it's kind of like it's into a world when you get that there.
I know. 994B is music Yeah, it's just gonna let Beth speak to the group. Dr. Levitt, are you up for Beth speaking to the group and then go to 994A even though it's larger?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll get that set up.
I'm not there yet.
We're gonna let Beth speak and then move to 994A. It's gonna be nice and cozy so you can hear it. After Beth speaks.
I should get my computer set up.
Okay, we're gonna get Jonathan help us in 994A in a bit. But right now, we're cozy till our boss speaks. My boss, anyway. Okay, I'm gonna go get the new one. Is there any other vegetarians in the crowd?
Out yourself.
Well, yeah, you can trade it. I'll take yours.
Okay.
You're doing pretty good. Thank you.
Okay.
Switches, yeah.
Yeah, but I get a minute.
I'll be there.
I'm seeing a lot of parking patients and Quintana patients and stuff. One guy who I haven't seen you in about a year and a half. I didn't see you for a year and a half. I think just wanted to come in. But usually we end up being on here for regular things. Yeah.
No, it really does. My resume. They were full. They were full this week. Yes.
Those are the students who just more.
I know Joanna is coming, and I think she was with someone.
Yes, Joanna will be here late because I won't take it.
Oh, okay. Somebody shady, I guess.
So, yeah.
That's very.
So I started walking in there, like, come on in.
You don't have to wait.
I'm not a hospital. I'm done, and I'm getting all that utilization, yada, I'm like, oh, thank God, I don't do that anymore.
Do I have to take you off the list?
Yeah. So I all right, so go ahead and get started. Are you guys,
Just
when I wrote your own name.
Just
There we go.
make it. Hey, we didn't. Make it.
Oh, Marie's here too. She was late for whatever reason. We're not talking about the.
Maybe we should get to 994 now. Let them
That's
talk
fair.
whatever they want. Oh,
We're gonna wait to 994 after. Here too.
I can go there. Oh, no.
That's like making it look like a cow, but you can really.
Oh, where are they?
I don't know, I think they're over here. Have these been cleaned?
No. Everybody. Here's one more.
Mike doesn't need lunch.
Joanna, sit here.
Oh,
I like,
No, I'm fine.
I like standing.
I love standing. Standing's my favorite thing. All right, now we have more lunches, so everybody else.
All right, we're here.
All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? I do not have slides for this, because I just decided. So. I don't know if we can do that on or off.
okay. You want to turn it off? Actually, I think that was definitely not the product.
So, I'm just gonna talk informally for a while, and start some discussion, and then I'm gonna turn several of the people that Bob or after. So this is really to kick off what is going to soon be our second year of our. I wanted to get the big picture. Let everybody else talk about what the actual work is. So, spend just 5 minutes reviewing how we got here, and what the reasons were for the change and where we're going. So the first thing to remember is that we didn't make the change because we were failing. We've never been a failing mode before. We've always been doing fine. Students have always and continue to feel like our program is good. Could be better, but it's good. So about 90% of our students say that our program is very good or good. And we ask them on that. That's not really changed. It hasn't changed. Remember, fourth year students, so we really don't have any information about first year students in 1 year. Our step 1 scores have been quite steady. We won't see any difference until the end of next year about the new curriculum, but we've been steady for a number of years. And we continue to be steady, and Mark's got some new information he'll share at some point, but with the exception of a couple individuals here and there, which we're never gonna pull for every single individual in our program, we're really getting close to 100% pass rate, and we don't expect that to change, and I really actually don't anticipate any large change. Several schools who take curriculum renewal see an increase in their board scores, but the board scores have been increasing nationally, so I'm not even sure with that. So if the scores have gone up 4 or 5 points over the last 5 years, and somebody says they did a 5-point increase in 5 years, another way we'll look over time to see how we're doing in the math. We're already doing really well in the math. So again, I don't know that I'm expecting us to see a big change in the math. Our match this year, we had by match day up 100% of our students matched into our residency program. I don't expect that to change. That also good. So why did we decide to make this change? And we did know this on our, over time that people had told us several things. One, they wanted to see that things, and this is national. They want to see that we're doing things that are relevant to step 1, that are relevant to the clerkships. They here specifically thought that they didn't see the cohesiveness of some of our clinical and non-clinical material, and that they thought there was a lot of variability in a lot of our sessions, a lot of different small groups all over the place. So those are some of the things we were trying to address. The things that are in our new curriculum, which are the tenets that aren't going to change, because there's a lot of things that may change over time depending on what we want to do with it. One is we are aligned with the common calendar. That's just the fact of the matter. It doesn't mean that there's not potentially wiggle room for certain things. For instance, we were allowed a variance for the summer quarter, so we have half of our summer quarter in session and half of our summer quarter out of session. If there was some reason why another week needed to change somewhere, we could propose that to the university. But by and large, our start dates and stop dates are, they're mandated by the university, and we need to keep that going. And the reason for that, from the university standpoint, is so that we can do more interprofessional education. There are some downsides, like for testers that are having multiple tests on the same day, and that's we can't really do about that. We are going to continue have a single task curriculum. That's not gonna change as time goes on. So that means that we're gonna continue, as we did this year, to do the normal and the abnormal together. If philosophically, anybody here thinks that's a bad idea, we can have that conversation, but that's, that's one of the tenets that we'll be forward with, that won't change. We're gonna continue to try to anchor as much as we can around the clinical cases. We're actually gonna increase our flexibility around that a little. So for instance, we are required by the LCME to have a research curriculum, which we have not normally had before. We're gonna put that into the curriculum this year. And the research curriculum isn't really getting this very well. So that may be tied or may not be tied. There may be some times where there is some basic science material, and I'll depend on you guys. I know this year there were places where we felt it was a little maybe ordered in a way where it would make more sense to be ordered slightly differently. So if we need to disconnect certain things from cases to make sure that we're doing things in the right order, we're flexible to think about that. But by and large, we want things to still be tied to cases. I think our students recognize they like to learn that way, and we still want to make that, we don't want to change that. We're going to work harder this next year to continue integrating things. So I think in some cases, you guys know some things were really integrated well and worked really well. Other times we were a little bit doing this and then doing that and then doing this, but we might have been, I think of it like 2-year-olds in the sandbox. We were there playing together, but we weren't necessarily really parallel playing together. But we need to work harder to make those things flow together. And part of that, I think, because we were never in the same spot together. So amongst the basic scientists, right, might have been looking, oh my gosh, this looks just like that, or the genetic thing looks just like something else. We could have, if I'd known you were teaching that, we would have been able to keep it together more. So this second go around, I hope we can do that even more. We're also going to be working, and Susan's not here, to think about the early clinical experiences and how we're going to try to start tying that into the curriculum. And that's going to be an ongoing several-year process. So those are the tenets. The format that's not going to change, we are going to continue to have the flipped classroom format. So we're not going to go back to having large classroom lectures. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that format can be delivered through you guys talking and other people listening. It's just going to be on a video, or it's going to be in small snippets that occur during sessions. If you know, I think Maureen found this out, that there are certain things, big concepts that people just don't, nobody was getting. It's hard to have them understand just by listening to something and coming into the classroom after they've worked on something to say, let's review these big 3 concepts that we know are going to be a problem. I think that's great. I think that's teaching people when they're ready to learn something, right? When they've worked to learn it and they try to apply it, the concepts that you can explain because you're experts, whether it's genetics, whether it's pathophysiology, whether it's physiology, all those things. I think it's what we want to strive to do. How we're going to do that next year, we're going to be working hard to be more aligned physically, like to try to have classrooms next to each other to make that easier for you and see how well that works. We're going to continue to have lots of assessments, and you guys are going to spend time digging into the code on that this year. I don't care at all what kind of assessment you have, except they need to be frequent, and there needs to be lots of formative stuff, and then there need to be times where there's summative assessments, and you can make some decisions about performance that is summative, so they get a grade after that. Other than that, I don't care how it's done. But you guys do. What I do care about is we need to have really good items, and we need to have a bank of them, and we need to have oversight in the Office of Medical Programs to say, we have vetted all these items, well written, as following the format we've decided on, and we are looking at the content and we find that it's content that will hopefully better tag. And how we derive those items and other things, this whole group is working on it. That's what you guys and then we're going to continue to have collaborative learning sessions, small group sessions. And this year we're going to keep the same size groups, except probably one more per group, because we're going to have a class of 144. That's the size of the class. Plus, plus 4 or 5 people who are coming back to take a second try at the first year. Or that, for whatever reason, believe that's. Maybe it's a little different for the level. So that's our plan. I have lots of literature based, that to justify why we're making these changes. There is a load of stuff about flipped classroom, K-12, and in medical education. I'm happy at some point if we wanted to say, let's get together and talk about the philosophy and decide if we're aligned. But I feel sort of like that ship has sailed, and I'm already well on board. But I'm happy to hear from people who say, you know what, let's go back and debate this. We need to do that. I am happy to have a debate about whether immigration is the right way to go or not, but that's going to be a tough argument to say we should be separated, better to teach everything in kind of silos and not connected. But we can have that conversation if we wanted to. The format, boy, we don't know what the best format is as far as what do you do with these small groups? What's the kind of activities that are absolutely best? And that's something we're going to need to work on together. We're doing the Harvard model. It's okay, but it's not. It isn't great. And I think we could probably do better. And because they've been working with to work on that. I think it's been well established in many arenas that frequent assessment helps people learn. You show a group of people who go through things with no tests and other people who get frequent formative low stakes testing. Every time the low test, the repeat testing does better. So that's just, I don't think that's anything that's up for debate, and it's something that we're going to continue to. All right. What were our big challenges this year, and something I want all of you guys to be thinking about during the rest of this afternoon as you're going to be working together? One is, I think that, I don't know that we underestimated, but we fully realized our concern that it was really hard to develop the amount of content that we developing content is super challenging, and we're trying to address that. How are we trying to address that? Well, one way is we're trying to relieve as much of the administrative burden as we can on all of you guys who are content experts. So, has everybody met Princess and Jeff? Have people met you guys yet? Why don't you have you guys introduce yourselves and the kinds of things that you're going to be working on this year?
I'm Princess, and I'll be working with y'all in helping provide support to faculty in developing objectives and working with the curriculum, and also doing the curriculum inventory, as well as helping teaching faculty and students interact with the curriculum inventory as well.
And I'm Jeffrey, and I will be helping the course directors with their timelines, making sure that all documents are received, and so that everything can be evaluated by the districts.
So basically, as opposed to being a course director and having the 17 different disciplines, you're trying to collect stuff and get it out and give them. We hope that we're administrating all of that centrally, which frees everybody up to actually work more on content, because only you guys, all of the people are content experts. We centrally aren't going to ever be able to do the content, but and you guys as a whole, and I'll put myself right in there, we're not process experts, we're not project managers, but Jeffrey is. so should have the ability to look at these 16 things that happen where we all just want to throw something across the room about how am I ever going to get all that done? And he says, that's what I do for a living, so that's what I hope helps him. We also need to think about, so that's your time management, we also have to think about the students' time management. The one thing that I am really concerned about is we had a lot of student stress this year, more than we've had. The counseling center had about a 25% increase, and in fact, about 25% of our medical students. That's what's hard. Yes. Which is because they were uptaking the
Maybe they pick up it's just noisy in this corner.
Okay. We could try, yes. Mark, you can come in the room too. can we do? Well, we can't just not assess. And I don't know that, I think not understanding what they are supposed to know is a cost thing. But I think we also have to deal with the very real fact that we've given the students more than they can do. Now that we're trying to add the roles in here, now that we're trying to integrate things, do more application, it takes a little bit more time. And they can't read 200-page documents, they can't listen to hours to prep every time. So each and every person in this room is gonna have to assess the value of all the content, assess the value of the assessments that are going on, and figure out what doesn't have to be taught in the first and second year. Some of it maybe doesn't really have to be taught to medical students at all, and some of it maybe can be taught to clinical medical students in the third and fourth years as opposed to pre-clerkship. We're gonna have to think about that. We're really gonna have a curriculum committee this year to help us going through all of our objectives when we finally have objectives and a curriculum report we're gonna have very soon. And to decide, is this relevant to the STEP exam? Because we don't want to have our students not prepared for the STEP exam. Or is this relevant to the clinical clerkships? If the answer is no and no, then we're gonna be moving stuff out of the curriculum. And every single person here, I'm sure, has stuff that could move out. Or some things in which you could teach one concept deeply and say these are the other things that are just like it that I'm not going to specifically teach. And you should be able to figure that out. For instance, in pharmacology, I'm sure you can hold a few examples of a drug where there's 6 of those. We're going to teach 1 of them, and then you guys are going to understand the process part better. Yeah, there we go. The 1 of 1. I usually know 1 of each. That's all I know. We're going to be looking for omissions. So despite the fact we say it's too big, we still know that there are some things we just don't have that we're required to have, or that we test them. We need to figure out what those are and make sure that we have those too. And then I really want to work on redundancies this year. I think between clinical and basic science, and within basic sciences, sometimes if there's something that, let's say in physiology you've done, and then in immunology or microbiology or pharmacology or something very similar, ask you guys to say, can we just say this once in 1 paragraph instead of saying it twice? And now that we've got everything there, I think we can do that, right? Because they're all looking at each other going, yep, that's in the plan. Because we've just got to decrease the number of pages of stuff we're expecting students to do. And we're going to have to think about, in histo and anatomy, both, we're going to think about each lab, and what are we doing in each lab, and is that something we need to do? In communication skills, if Jamie was here, in history, taking and other things, and all of our role curriculum, we think about, is this session something that needs to happen in the classroom? Is it something that should go in a different venue? Is it something that we don't actually, do we need to have 2 articles or something? We can get something down to 1 article. And I think everybody in this room's got stuff that they're going to need to work on, and we're going to be helping for the group to see that. Yes.
Maybe
Absolutely.
one of the things that, in line with what you're saying, in the past, obviously, there's always been something covered that's on step 1, and there's never been a systematic and to help the students know about that. Basically, okay, we're done with the curriculum, now you're on your own step 1 study time. There's holes, hopefully they find them. If you don't, then we can try to make it, we can go through the thoughtful process of what we're teaching. If there are things that we know we are leaving out, where it's sort of like, here's a big list at the end of the curriculum, that, by the way, this is important stuff. No, we left it out because whatever reason, but we suggest we focus on getting covered. Right?
One other thing I'm going to only touch on is, because I know that I thought about this a lot, I'm sure some of you have, I'm sure had maybe an educational background. Specifically, how are we going to know we're more successful with this? And it's a challenge to think about that. So that's going to be part of our program evaluation. I'm going to end this by having everybody introduce ourselves, and we have a program evaluation expert now, right? And we're going to be looking across all the students, how the students perform, how well we are adhering to our philosophy that we've got going on, how well our students are doing. But like I've already said, it's going to be difficult to show our students are doing better because they've been doing well. And we're going to be looking for some sort of novel ways of assessing students' statements and dimensions that we have haven't done before, hypothesizing what it is you think we're teaching, which is, I hope, to be more collaborative, to be more active, to understand clinical application of things more than they have in the past. But I'm looking for all of you guys to help us figure that out as we move along, also. What would I like you guys to accomplish this afternoon, as sort of here we are, we're starting to move forward? One is, I really, really want us to be thinking about integration this year. So you're all in the room here together. This is a great time to understand where everybody else is coming from and to really work together. I want to see collaboration between the basic sciences and each other, and between the basic and clinical sciences. I'd like us, as much as we can, to not have sessions that are just this or just that, but try to have sessions that put things together as much as makes sense. But we want to make sure that we're educating our students in the very best way that they should be educated. But the final thing is, I want us to try as much as we can to get outside the box. You know, when we came up with this curriculum integration, it wasn't to put us in one box and move us to a different box. It was trying to sort of get out of the box and to think about what actually makes the most sense for our students, to help them learn not to be a pediatrician, not to be an emergency medicine physician, not to be a physiologist, but learn to be a medical student who has the potential to go on to train in anything that they want to be trained in. I think that we need to keep that endpoint in mind and really do our best in the second year, think about what worked and do more of it, think about what didn't work so well, and go to the next iteration. And I expect in a year we'll come up with the third iteration. And we'll probably be 5 years into it before we think we're at a state where we've got things so we're doing we want them to be, and that's fine. I think that's like medicine. You know, I used to know how to treat hypertension, and now, who knows? Everything gets turned on. I don't even know what I'm supposed to put, what I don't know what my goal is for half my patients now. And that's okay, because we try to get better and better as time goes on. All right, are there particular questions for me? Because I have a patient in half an hour, and I'm gonna go over to RUI and start the patient. Other topics you guys want to bring up while I'm here?
In terms of student wellness, trying to improve the curriculum to hopefully relieve the distress of the students, what other steps are being taken to kind of reduce their stress level?
Well, one thing we're doing, which I think sounds contrary when you initially think about it, is in our assessments, we're trying to identify all the students who are at risk as early as possible. And we're trying to figure out what individual things we can do for that. So we have a new student manager of student services, and she meets with every single student who's on Diana. Have you guys all met Diana? You know, she just get come over and meet her maybe at some point too. And so Mark and Ann are helping us to, do identify people, and then we're trying to work with them in that.
Also,
There you
they
go.
just want to know stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I'm sure you guys have the same feeling, that I feel like I say something and then a minute later I hear about how I wish you had told me this. Well, I just told you that. So students, the way our students perceive us communicating, it's not the most functional way that they would like it. And I think what we're coming to understand is they're the generation that looks stuff up on their phone, right? So the fact you told them that and it's on a piece of paper somewhere doesn't actually mean that they want to be able to plug something in and have it come up the minute they want to know about it. So we have to figure out ways to have stuff available to them electronically so they can get in. What we think this year will probably be more of on our website, but if it may be in Entrada, we're going to think about different things, and that's part of what we need to do too. We just have to be really transparent about here's what we're going to do, and then we have to do what we say we're going to do. The other thing we don't do very well is we don't adhere to our own policies as well as we don't write everything down. Part of it's trying to be as realistic as we can and trying to take each student's things into account, but I think in some ways students need to understand exactly what's expected so that they're clear to them. Do better with that.
Can I add
One thing, we've been talking about this.
Oh, yes, we have our wellness person here.
Yes. No, so we're doing a lot of stuff with Dave's heading up a lot of this. So like building circles, but also more social events. Like one of the things that I think, if we remember back to our med school experiences, there was something about the camaraderie or like just our, postgraduate or post-college experience. There's something about the camaraderie of your program and the people who are in the trenches with you. And while they're in small groups and they probably have increased class time, I think that they don't feel as social with each other. And that sense of community, maybe they don't feel quite as much. So we're trying to create opportunities for them to, within the construct of Garage, or within like social hours or outings or tickets to games or things that they can manage within their schedule, but that allow them to connect.
Yes.
I had a question about, if we're going to revisit here in, or are there technology solutions to overcome the physical difficulty of being in places like this?
Uh-huh. Rahul, why don't I let you do this? Because I'm like, I can work the internet.
We certainly can. I think we should probably talk about what were the problems with using it to see if we can address that. Because I know we started kind of gangbusters with it, but then it dropped off. I don't know why it dropped off. So I think once we understand why that is, figure out a way to appear in, where you would kind of appear on the screen, and might have been that I think people didn't have devices. You couldn't do it from the computers in the room. So we had
So should we have technology solutions that work and that are work at the moment that work absolutely? That's something that we should know so much more about than I do. That I think right in the long run, just so the whole group knows what the plan is in the long run. That's not this year. This is next academic year. Is we, the OMSP, is going to move out of 5 back and we're going to move to HR. HR is moving out, and then we're going to move in there. Then they're going to take our space, flatten it, and turn it into a very large classroom space, subdivided in different ways. So the plan is that in academic year 1920, we'll be able to have most of our sessions in this space, which would allow us to have smaller groups becoming bigger groups and a very flexibility in kinds of groups. And we could easily have 2 or 3 or 4 people in a space that could go from spot to spot. And I think it's going to really let us imagine lots of other ways we could teach. So that's what we, between now and then, we're still going to be stuck with the same thing. What we've asked the university, and I have no idea if they'll grant this, which are not, is to mostly be on the 7th floor next year, because 7, 10, 11, 12, 13 are getting some technology improvements, and then the NDLs are getting facelifts so that they are better suited for classrooms. And my feeling would be if we could have those rooms for the most part, it'd be a lot easier, especially for you guys to run from room to room. If all you do is run from 10 to 11 to 12 to 13, rather than 9 to 10 to 7 to 5. So that's the short term. It's kind of this plan, but of course I don't actually schedule it, so I have no other questions about it. Other questions? I realize that I'm not really, does everybody in this room know each other? Do you introduce the introduction? What do you guys think? Nah? All right, so Anne is one, then we will have Anne introduce her. Okay. Anne, introduce yourself.
Can I here? Program evaluation.
Tell about your background a little bit.
Oh, so I study organizational psychology. Coming here from Washington D.C. to survive my first internship at success. So I haven't figured out.
Good. So she and Mark are really doing that assessment and program evaluation. Level where we can handle a lot of data that we haven't been able to handle. So that's going to help us to look back at the program that we're running to make better decisions about what's working. I mean, we have, as you guys know, hundreds and hundreds of pages of data. Yes. All right. Anything else you guys want to ask? Otherwise, I think I'm going to turn it over to Rahul or Bob to put gonna go down the hall.
Move to 994A. Bigger room, cooler room. Thank you, Bev.
All right, thank you guys.
Let me show you a secret way.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Is that what you mean?
Did I? Yeah. You want to get anything?
No, it's the easy agenda. We need to take Princess, those shoes are amazing.
The baby, we love to come in about an hour.
I was thinking about you the other day, because you said you
Let know we're moving in 994.
This is my first
Yeah.
time.
For them to come in. For an hour. And we did there. Great. Thank you.
Here, we're moving room.
No,
Job security, that's what this is. Always has something to do.
Is that what this is?
Absolutely.
I don't think that job security and being busy are the same thing.
Yeah, I've sat on those before. So,
Yeah.
I have to be in that state of mind for that.
I know.
So we're going to often judge our product, in this case the full course, by evaluating either the presence or absence of certain features and characteristics that our courses have. And so I just wanted to kind of outline what I think some of these characteristics and features are, so that we can be on the lookout for these as we're managing our various courses. So for example, throughout our courses, we would like to see an absence of errors and typos in documents. Okay, these lists are not comprehensive, but instead are just examples. Throughout the course, we might want to see an absence of changes during the course. So I know a lot of times there are documents that got re-uploaded and all this stuff. And you can imagine from a student perspective how much of a frustration that would be. Okay? We might also want to see an absence of excessive information. So this is one of my pet peeves in particular, and that is I hate emailing students unless it's information they absolutely need to know. So if I had to count the number of times I actually sent out an announcement to the students last year, it's probably about 8 times if I had to go back and count it. Okay. So if there was an error in the document of mine, I'm not saying I was error-free. By all means, there were a number of errors, right? But were the errors so significant that I needed to let the students know? If it was not that significant, let it slide by, make sure I didn't assess them on it, and no one knew either, right? So I think we can do a better job in particular at emailing and sending out announcements to students and really reduce that number and necessity of what they need. So when we look at things that the students want to see in the course, of course, clear objectives is is always expected. Realistic expectations, and that comes from our policies and procedures and so forth. And then organization and order. So this kind of gets into the Entrada piece of the learning management system, how that's organized. It also gets into the self-study documents, how those are organized, and in the CBCL sessions and how those are formatted and organized as well. Logic. If there is logic in what we do, and if we share that logic with our learners, then I think they're more open to accepting that logic. So whether it's logic of sequence, of why we're presenting things in the order that we are, or logic of other things. So just keep in mind that they like to see logical progression of things, and it's even good if we can iterate why this progression is in place and how we set up, right? Variety. I do think students like variety. I know as a learner, I prefer and like variety. That doesn't mean that they like variety in all these different formats, okay? For example, the CBCL sessions have a great variety of different activities that we do, but they're all relatively formatted in a similar way so that students can still navigate the documents that they need easily and efficiently. All right, and then ease of accessibility and navigation, so that again is really getting at the Entrada learning management system. And then, of course, we want continuity, clarity, specificity in our documents and announcements and so forth. So when you look at these two drawings, which would you say is of higher quality? The one on the left or the one on the right? One on the left. Okay, and why do you say that? You like the one on the right, okay?
Depends what you're trying to talk about.
So Anne, why do you like the one on the left?
More detail.
More detail.
Different shades of gray.
All right, so to Marine's point, that is what I'm trying to teach you. Okay, so the mark of quality, in my opinion, is in the details. So not only in the details of what we present to the students, but in the details of reviewing all the documents that are coming in, for example. So how do we help to ensure quality? Well, here's kind of the general process I typically use. And it really is kind of very cyclic in nature, and this has worked for me. So maybe this is a process you might consider as you're beginning to plan for your upcoming courses. So I always start here in the upper right of the screen with the planning and forethought. So obviously our courses, my course isn't for another 8 months right now, but there are things that I'm planning for, whether it's making changes or planning on integrating with other people that I'm beginning to think about now. So I think the more lead time that you have to do your planning prior to the 2 weeks coming up to your course, the better, because you have, it's a more relaxed setting when you have more time to plan and you're not as rushed. And so it just makes sense to try to give yourself as much lead time as possible. And then it's really critical to review our products from a non-expert perspective. I can't emphasize this one enough. So we too often will review our products from the expert perspective as a faculty member. Whatever you do what you can to put yourself in the shoes of the student and pretend as though it's your first time seeing and looking at that document. Ask yourself, if I'm reading this, is it clear where I have to go next? Is the progression in logical, is there a progression of logical order? Is my eye being drawn to something that it shouldn't be drawn to? All right, those types of questions can really make a big difference in how the products are presented and perceived by the students. So do what you can to plan into your process a review process. It was very challenging to do that this year in particular because documents were coming in so late. I get that. But at the same time, I hope that there's not documents you're sending out that you haven't reviewed, because that's where, of course, errors can occur. And then next, I like to reflect on and contemplate why I made certain decisions I made. So this is where you take a step back, and even after you've done the review, you think a little more globally about formatting, about content. And if I don't have a rationale for why I made a certain decision, the students might be questioning that. And so it makes you ponder a little bit more and give a little more credence to justifying what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then that can also help you to figure out and anticipate if there are any potential problems or issues. This is probably the most challenging to do, but if you do stumble across things that you find will be potential problems, and if you have enough planning in advance, you can probably fix those problems before they become problematic. So I think you can figure out, this is very cyclic in nature, and the more we can give attention to specifically the review area and the reflection area, I think the better off our courses are going to be in general. Okay? So I don't want to bore you with any more of my own philosophy. Again, this is just things that have worked for me. And so maybe there's a pearl here somewhere that you can take away and take back with you to try as you are preparing for your next courses. So I want Jeffrey to present now on the Entrada piece. So again, we really did this from a data-driven perspective. So Jeffrey went through all the Entrada pages across all the courses, kind of did a compare and contrast against all of those pages to figure out what was the same, what was different, what do we need to unify, and things like that. I did something similar for all of the self-studies, and then Maureen is going to give us some comments on the CBCLs. So Jeffrey, if you want to speak to Entrada.
So we would recommend standardizing Entrada. Currently the faculty lists and the course navigation are uniform. Having a more uniform system would allow students to more easily navigate the system and then also see where information is, and that would hopefully help to reduce the chances that they would have to either go to each other or to the course director or to the coordinator to find certain documents that they can't find. So the faculty lists. They currently aren't alphabetical. Some faculty are missing images, and most faculty don't have their roles listed. As I was going through it, when I just started a couple of weeks ago, I noticed that it was very confusing to try to figure out who are these people. I don't even know who they are. So just it can be confusing. If it was confusing to me, then it was probably confusing to the students as well. So here is just a quick screenshot of 3 different courses and how the faculty lists were laid out for those courses. So as you can tell, if you know these people, then that's great, but I didn't know most of that, which made it a bit difficult to figure out who they were or what their roles were, what their responsibilities were. So we would recommend removing the faculty from the background where they currently are, and then developing a faculty tab in Entrada, and then having the faculty listed according to their discipline, role leader, faculty, or educator. We also recommend having them by last name. And we do have a couple of questions. So what would we do with faculty who have multiple roles? And also, should we include credentials?
Okay, so do we like this idea of removing faculty from the opening homepage and giving them their own tab and organizing it in a similar way that is presented here?
Yes.
The only downside, I think it is nice for those students to be able to see their pictures. The alphabetization part of it is in the queue for work in Entrada to correct. But
This was the pictures, right?
Yeah, it's not pictures.
Oh,
This
you
was
still
just
have the pictures.
yeah. This was just to show you what it could look like, but with just for the information. So it will be sorted by discipline director, role leader, faculty, educator.
Just to make sure, it is, no matter how it's listed, alphabetically or by role or whatever, it is helpful to have them all on one page, because you can do a search and find whatever you need.
Yeah.
My guess is most savvy students will do that. So as long as it's all on one page, that's my opinion. It's good.
My team works with the Entrada development team pretty regularly, so it looks cosmetic. But the way that Entrada has that front page laid out is it's templated. So, and there's a million things that work off of that on the back end, off of that page. Like, for example, once faculty members are added to that page, all of the evaluations sampled from that page, or certain types of evaluations sampled off that page. So what I'm saying is, this might be like a whole project request that Entrada, if you're really insistent on separating it from a page. It's related to so many things, because there's modules that plug into Entrada with faculty effort in a course, right? How many hours do you teach? And that all reads off of that intro page, which is where Entrada as a consortium has decided to put the faculty thing. So you might need to make all of those changes within that page, but still make all those changes in terms of organization, whatever.
Would those changes be something that Entrada could do if it stays on the background page?
I think you need to talk to the team. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. All I know is that there's a bunch of stuff built off of faculty being entered there.
Okay. Great. Good to know. Thank you.
But at minimum, even if we have to keep it on that front page, we could add credentials without messing up that, because Adam had that in his block where he had credentials.
Really?
Can you go back one? See, director of assessment, micro-immunodiscipline director, pediatrics, co-discipline. So some of them have them and some don't, but if we could add, oh, sorry, not credentials, sorry, role. So role in the curriculum. So at minimum, we could probably add that without moving it off the page. Because I think that would also be really helpful, because something I struggled with and students was sometimes somebody's face would pop up and I have no clue who they were. Most of the time it turned out they were like behavioral scientists, educators, but at the same time, it would be helpful to know who that person is from a student perspective. Okay, do I work with this person or not? You know, so we could add that without removing it, that would be helpful.
What would be the argument, when you say credentials, I think MD, PhD, whatever your degree is, what's the argument against it there?
Oh, no, I thought I saw on the next slide something about should be included prevention.
They're just not listed, so it was just, should they be
I
included?
would think you would want to, because there's sort of, it's an important part of our identity, what we do, like.
So now we're going to go over to the course navigation. The course navigation tabs in Entrada currently aren't consistent. The naming and the ordering of the tabs, and then also some don't contain any information at all. So when you click on the tab, there's nothing there. So this is from 3 courses, Vital Fluids and Gases, Movement and Mechanics, and then Brain Computer Recognition. Just a sampling of how the courses are currently laid out for these 3 courses. And as you can see, they aren't consistent. So Brain Behavior and Cognition, for example, has a CE checklist, and the other 2 don't have that. Discussions for Vital Fluids and Gases is under cases, and that's not the case for the other 2. And then here, I just wanted to show you what it looks like alphabetically. So here you can see block review materials, for example. In Brain Behavior and Cognition, nothing was uploaded, but the tab was there. The tab didn't, it wasn't in Vital Fluids and Gases, but it was in Movement and Mechanics. Syllabus and planning, for example, in Movement and Mechanics, there wasn't a study plan, but there was a syllabus. So it's just questions like that that we should consider. And then this is also the inconsistency in the naming of the cases in Entrada. So as you can see, it can probably be a bit confusing to students when they see what it looks like in one course, and then it's different in another course, and then it's different again in a course after that. So if we could just have a quick discussion on some of these consistencies. Would removing folders that don't have any materials prevent students from contacting a course director? However, if a student also sees that a folder exists somewhere that doesn't exist in another course, the question is, what is going to be more important? And then how should the navigation tabs actually be set up? Should it be priority, timelines, alphabetical? Any ideas of standardizing case naming and uploads? And then should background include the course number? If you see here, background for RMD 564 has the course number, but the other 2 don't. Most of them didn't have the course number.
So as the project manager, who do you envision to be the homogenizing force here? Is it you working with the coordinators, or like who's doing the work and who's checking the work for homogenizing?
Well, I would think that it would be the course directors who come to a decision on what they would like to do. Okay. And then I would work with the coordinators to make sure that it's actually done that way, that it's implemented properly.
So if you could go back, I guess the biggest thing I want to kind of resolve now, if possible, back again, is really this navigation page, this home navigation page, because this is the one that students will see and use the most, I think. So if we could have a discussion surrounding this about which of these tabs are absolutely necessary, and which we would like to see really across courses, I think that will help us to come to some continuity here.
I think we should, I would suggest that we not have tabs that are empty. Now, I'm willing to accept there may be a tab that will appear in one course and maybe not in another course possibly, but if it's an empty tab, we just shouldn't have it, because we're going to waste students' time looking for something that's not in there.
Agreed.
So I think one of the hurdles that we might run into is that certain courses have different components. So for example, in my block, there's histo tab, but there's no gross anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should have like a set, amount of tabs that show up in every course. And then there are a couple that, depending on the content of the course, may be added. So for instance, I wouldn't have a gross anatomy tab, but then when they transition into Vital Fluids and Gases is when it starts, right?
Yep.
Then we would add that tab.
So I have a question, statement. I don't know how easy, again, like Mark said, it would be to alphabetize these things. And some of them have to be there the way Entrada works.
You can change the order of.
Oh, you can? All right.
Because that's that left-hand
Yeah.
menu on, those you can add and subtract as a user, and I think you can move.
Some of them are in there. And like
Some of them are pre-programmed, that's true. I don't know if we can hide those.
If for the things like histopath and anatomy, and things that are sessions, they're just not case sessions, should we rename the cases thing sessions and put everything in one area so that students know all course materials are in one spot?
The one thing that's coming down the Entrada pipeline is, and I think that's going to resolve a lot of this, is Entrada was originally designed to house documents at the event level. And there's a lot of advantages to housing documents at the event level, because then when you do search through like curriculum inventory, then you can cascade down to like see the actual documents that you use to do whatever to teach something. Because we were having 8 of the same sessions, and the way that we had to put the events in there, it basically created 8 individual events that were only linked through name. In this next release of Entrada, they're creating like whatever, a linked events kind of thing, where you can create an event and branch it out 8 times, and the only thing that differs between those branches is time, place, and group assignment, but everything else, so learning objectives, course materials, whatever, is linked back to that parent event. So it'd be nice for us, once that's on the ground and we can pilot it, to move away from everything on the course navigation tab on the left side to it being linked to on the event schedule.
Yeah, but real quick, to Rahul's point, for this coming fall, since I don't anticipate we'll be at that.
They're going to be rolling out 113 in a couple weeks, so that I think that feature is in 113.
So that is an option.
But I think we should definitely plan
both
ways.
So wait, the navigation tabs won't exist in this new
They'll
rollout?
exist. You just don't have to. You just won't have to put them separately. So right now, if we have a histopath lab, it says histopath lab, and then the date, and then there's another subfolder with all the years in there. This way, the students will just see histopath lab on their calendar. They'll click on it, and then everything that they need for that entire event is packaged in one place.
So it'll get rid of kind of some of that folder tree
Exactly.
format, which that would be helpful.
Yeah.
On the navigation tabs though, so we would still have those?
Yeah, you can put as many as you want.
You wouldn't need them for because we're largely using them specifically for that purpose, to get students to the documents that they need that are associated with the event. And once the events are all tied directly to the event, once all the documents are tied to the event in the calendar, you won't need them all.
So then that works for all like the case events, but for things like the syllabus, announcements,
other things,
course,
of course, yeah. Yes.
So maybe those are the things we should focus on having. And then, like Rahul said, for this year, if the rollout doesn't happen, we just have sessions and we have, tabs for every single session that mirror kind of what we do on the course completion checklists that Jeffrey's been creating for each course. So that also that would provide some consistency between what is being turned in and what gets uploaded. And then the other tabs we think about are tabs for like course level material, kind of like we had at Blackboard.
Yeah, we'll still have to have syllabus.
Because we still have, there's always things.
And then also, I don't think we should call them cases, because despite what Beth said earlier, what we have been calling them clinical skills sections, and I'm trying to use the term more role session, will mostly not be case driven. So it makes it, I think, ambiguous to students. So if you just use the title session, and it'll be either a basic science session or a role session. Sometimes there might be some integration material, most of them there won't be.
Is there a reason why we have to delineate them individually and cannot group them in a central nomenclature? Like, is there a reason why we couldn't group it with like lab materials and have it nested as Entrada? I'm still learning Entrada. So with Entrada, could it be a lab folder? Like, so then you have, so every course has a lab materials folder, and then nested in there could be lab or histo or whatever it's in there.
It's just a matter of how many clicks do you want to take to get there.
It's really-
Right now, Entrada is very clicky.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So do you want us to like actually talk about these and kind of
Yeah.
narrow
Yeah.
it?
Actually, consensus on what we
Okay.
feel like now.
So like, I think we need announcements, because that's a given. But background, I don't know how background differs from syllabus and planning. Like, what are we, I don't remember filling out background for host defense. So now I'm very curious what's in there.
That was 3 months.
That's what the faculty are all on. They're
But
on
I
the
thought they were
background.
on the homepage.
That's the background.
Oh, okay, so I guess
So kinda
we have to
the
have
feedback.
that.
I actually don't think it's really useful for the students to have it all alphabetical. I think the
Yes.
priority thing should be at the top, like, what are the policies of the course, you know? That
Oh, this-
kind of information.
This
should
just
be right
helps
in
us
their
see what's
face.
missing from each.
Yeah.
I know, but we're talking about how to organize it.
Yeah.
So I
Wait,
think-
so you're saying you want it at the top, or?
Yeah, I'd like to see, you know, the important things for the course that they need to know right in their face.
So more like
First thing that
this,
they see.
background announcements, syllabus.
Yeah,
So-
so you want that instead of alphabet?
Yeah, I mean, that seems to make sense, so the student needs to know, if the calendar is right at the top, then they have all their events right there, they're going off the calendar, right?
Well, when
Or
they
if
log into the
If the
course,
syllabus is
they'll
right
have,
there, then they know what they need to
when
do.
the student logs in, they see a calendar on that page
Right.
when they go to the course.
Okay. I'm just saying that I think the priority organization is better than the alphabetical.
Okay, so you're
We
saying
can
the
decide
first,
what we consider the most important priority.
so maybe we get a list down and then we prioritize.
That's what I thought.
Good.
Okay,
I would dare say that if you talk to the vast majority of students, they'll tell you that most of the time when they logged in, they went right to the cases tab.
Yeah.
Most of the time they're down in the bottom.
If that's their priority, then it should be. I mean, whatever we consider is the priority.
My guess is that if it appears in the same place every time, they'll just.
They'll
find
find it,
by
yeah.
right to it.
They'll be fine. That's the point, is consistency.
okay, so we need announcements. Background doesn't get to change because that's the backbone of the thing. I don't know what block review means.
We put that together because when students were studying for exams, we made, the review sessions aren't that long. So a lot of people may review videos, they may only exam questions available. Histology put something together, and so rather than keeping it spread out across the site, we condensed it all into one folder and told the students, okay, if you need the stuff to study for the exam, all the extra materials.
I think that's worthwhile adding.
Okay, the other thing I would ask is we stick to one terminology, we either stick with blocks or courses, we shouldn't mix and match. I don't have a strong bias towards one or the other, I kind of prefer course, but
directors, I think.
Yeah. But I agree, it's good having that, but could we stick to either?
Okay, so course review materials.
Yeah, because this is course calendar, course director.
Alright, so course review materials, what else was on that list? We're gonna have something with cases, right?
We
Well,
rename-
sessions.
we rename-
Oh,
we rename
sessions.
Sessions. So we call
Now,
it
sessions would encompass CBCL, role sessions, lab sessions.
Their sessions.
Yeah. But these are really,
In which case, we may want to call it small group sessions as opposed to lab sessions. I don't know.
I'm just thinking that my stuff is usually main documents, they're using the entirety of the block as they
As
get
opposed
to
to
various sessions. They're not broken out into individual sessions necessarily, whereas Kristen's usually are.
So what if instead we have sessions, that's CBCL's role session, and then we have a separate tab that is listed for what it is? So kind of like you have the 562A, there's a histopath lab tab, and then there's a gross anatomy lab tab material. And that way it's very clear which lab session they're dealing with. The only thing that I think that might be a problem with is when they roll out this new Entrada and it's tied to events, how does that, do we still have your material go across? Because yours will go to discrete events, whereas yours is across.
I mean, so according to what Mark is saying, there's still the option, I mean, you can still put a syllabus there and it shows up the entire time. So I don't see how my material would be any different than that. So as long as the option is still feasible, I think, I just don't tie mine to specific sessions.
Okay.
We should just call it histology lab going forward.
You don't want
Okay.
to use it as a pathway?
No. Think we need more histology.
So there's pathology coming out of the lab.
Yeah, I mean, we were just kind of reduplicating a lot of the pathology stuff that was already in the self-study sessions.
We don't think the students gain a lot of benefit from having the
I think that we can,
pathologist in there.
I think that they can better incorporate that same things into activities.
That's fine.
I think they need to.
So if that's the case, we'll just have to be cognizant about where the labs are placed in relationship to those activities. Because that was actually a problem this past year with some of the histo labs in particular where it
Came way after somebody else.
Right, that was some disconnect with trying to teach pathology with and normal together is that the cases would have pathology before they had the histology. So
Not the schedule issue. Not on our agenda for this afternoon, but maybe, we do need to talk about
that's
that.
an example of the integration.
Yeah.
And I think on a course level, because I know when we were getting ready to schedule labs for those defense, I talked with Chris and then I talked with Mark because there was an issue last year. So I think that as you put it together. What's documents?
There's nothing in there.
Right, so that doesn't need to happen. Course roster, I use that. Does anyone else use that?
I do.
I'd use that too. Could we call it student roster?
Yeah.
Yeah, this course would also include faculty. I feel
Yeah,
like.
I think it gives more specific.
Right, so student roster.
Is it possible to have the student roster like in a document that you don't have to pull up each individual one? I found that really hard to learn people's faces and names by. So
What I'll be happy to, for the clinician educators, since they're in small group all the time, but I should do that for everybody who's teaching faculty, is we put together, the student pictures by group. So here's group 1 students, group 2, group 3, and send them that as a PDF. So we'll just send that to everybody. But that's all there.
Yeah, I just had a hard time learning that.
Okay.
That's handy, but please do keep it like that.
Yeah, keep the link, but we also, I think we want the book.
Yeah, but, right, to try and solve that without having to do something different and then try.
Okay.
Not to replace that, but to help mark it.
So-
End up.
Can that be more organized so that our lab groups can also be?
Don't you do that for that?
I do that for
And
my.
Ed puts that together for his
Yeah.
lab. The students in Histo Lab are there by number of groups though, right? Like group 1, group 2.
Yeah, it's not always, sometimes it's split in the middle, because there's 6 labs, I think.
So that I would have to rely on, you and I can talk about that.
Yeah,
That's something
okay.
you have to generate.
It would be really nice though for the instructors here. We used to
Yeah.
have to make it ourselves, we're clicking and putting it
Well, you might have to.
So,
in. Kind of a
so,
pain, yeah.
so Bill Fleming was kind enough last year to generate mine for me.
Oh, okay.
I gave him the list of which students were in each lab
Oh,
group and.
okay.
and
So he can do
populated
that?
that.
That's nice.
He did for me last year. I assume he'll have the same time to do it again this year, because I'm hoping.
Just give them, yeah, please.
Where'd you leave off?
Okay, so we did block review, the cases became sessions, CE checklist. What is that?
There was nothing in there.
All right, so then we don't need it. Course calendar, we need. Right? Okay. Course objectives,
So
I
that-
think that should go with syllabus,
That
right?
should be in the syllabus. I don't think we need a separate tab for it necessarily.
Yeah, I think, so you have this syllabus and planning at the bottom. What was the planning component of that?
That was the,
Schedule.
yes, what did I call that? The plan of study schedule.
I thought you did that by week,
Yes.
so there were
There-
multiple
there was a-
documents in
There
there?
was a link to a Google Doc because I was about 2 weeks ahead of the students in the planning.
Okay,
And so I wanted them to have the latest and greatest, so they could refer to either the self-study document, which usually it was accurate, or the Google Sheet. So there was just a link to the Google Sheet with the plan of study.
To go back to, just to confirm, we don't want to have a separate tab for course objectives.
No, we're not.
The only reason I'm coming back to it briefly is the university syllabus template is not the most wonderful thing. And I think the students might appreciate just being able to see the course objectives without having to go through that syllabus.
I don't think the students have to look at the course objective. I mean, it's one thing for the session.
No, but we have to document that it was available and visible to them, right?
Well, it's in the syllabus. I mean, I think for accreditation purposes, that's perfectly fine.
So what if we rename this tab, like something kind of administrative, like, I'm terrible with words, so Adam fix this for me, but course syllabus planning and objectives, like that's what's gonna be in there. Syllabus, maybe a sheet that has the objectives separately, or in the syllabus, doesn't matter to me, and then the study session. So this is kind of like the administrative, you gotta have this information component of the course.
For curriculum inventory purposes, we need to have objectives tied to sessions in Entrada, and we're gonna get there once the curriculum inventory is put together, but the only place where eventually objectives should ever live is not in any documents anywhere, but they should only live and be manipulated in Entrada, and all stakeholders should have access to that curriculum inventory from a single place of truth, and that has to be, whatever it is, it has to be one place. So again, when we, Entrada and the OIME curriculum inventory upload is set up around reading bottom up. So it reads events, right? It reads events, it sees what objectives are tied to events, and then it aggregates from the bottom up hierarchically. So I think while we're still working on the curriculum inventory, we can work off documents and stuff and post them, but like it eventually has to get.
So eventually Entrada will have a place that course objectives live.
Right.
Okay, but for now.
And session objectives, yeah.
Right, so, because like, we'll have us all building our Legos, we're playing nicely building our Legos, and then eventually we're going to create a little town of Legos that are the course objectives, right? So, for now though, if we have these course objectives, we need to have a place where the students can see them. So, to me, I don't know, it makes sense to wherever that eventually goes in Entrada, we can either add the syllabus or we can add the link to that there eventually, but for this year, we need a place to put these official documents. Any ideas?
I would just like a long-term.
Yeah.
Long-term planning, and students are able to see the objectives when they're tied to events on their own, so you won't have to have documents floating around. They'll be able to see them once they're tied in Entrada.
Entrada's reporting of objectives is very rudimentary right now, so we'll get there.
At the administrative level, but for what students are interested in terms of a specific session or a specific session, it works great.
All right, so an administrative tab with syllabus, plan of study, and course objectives, which would be duplicated in the syllabus as well.
Okay, so what do we want to call that?
So I do remember Lisa telling me there were character restrictions on these titles. So the title you proposed is probably too long. But for now, let's just call it those three, and then we can figure out a more eloquent name.
Maybe course administration? No, that doesn't sound welcoming. Just sounds boring and horrible.
But I think the collectives compilation, because that's where they're all going to live, they're also going to be distributed to the syllabus, right?
We'll figure out a better name. I mean, as long as we know the tab is there and reserved for that purpose, I think that's the goal of today.
All right. Okay, so then we have course objectives. We already did student roster. Discussion board, I think, is underutilized, but we should use more. Now that Tom taught me how to use it.
Thank you for saying that. I think the students like that. I certainly found it to be handy because you can answer questions there once, and then you can have 9 students emailing the same question to you. What I did find was that I had tried it. I had to check it every morning, and I had to let other people know when some of the questions were being asked. I'd like to get to the point where that wasn't true, but it probably isn't true. Nevertheless, I think it should be there.
So that's one of the things that always dropped off of my radar is going in to check that. Mark, since you're so familiar with Entrada and the updates coming, where is this, does this already exist? Is there a way to push that to the course directors so that we know when something has been posted?
I just asked them the same thing because I have another community where I'm monitoring stuff. There's, when you say something, you can push it out to the group. But if something comes in, there's no way for notification to come in. So for myself, I make myself a recurring task list, and that's on my recurring task list to check that like every couple of days.
You can subscribe to the thread once it started, so when somebody posts
Oh.
something, you can say, notify me of replies.
Sorry. So Rick will just mention on Slack here that there is an RSS feed mechanism there.
Is there?
Oh,
But it's just not working right now.
RSS?
So you can subscribe, if you have any RSS reader, which pretty much there's no piece of software now that doesn't have some sort of.
RSS. Yeah, we start with rudimentary.
All right.
What is RSS?
You guys have used like Apple News or something like that on your phone? It's kind of like that, or anything that it just collects information, puts it in one place for you.
Yeah.
Once we get it start up and running, we'll show you how to use it, and there's 100 different things that you could have the New York Times go through it. You could have the New England Journal of Medicine table of contents go to it. It'll organize it, it'll do all sorts of things, and Trada can be one of those.
So for what it's worth, Maureen and I last year, toward the end of the year, we implemented, I think because the Google or the Entrada discussion board was cumbersome to use, we set up a Google Doc where the students could go on the Google Doc anonymously if they wanted to, because that sometimes that was more comfortable for them, and post a question. Hey, I didn't understand, hypovolemic shock, can you explain it to me again? And so then, we would obviously get alerts on our email when the student had put a question there, and then we just answer it there, and then all the students could log into that document. I had kind of envisioned students commenting, like putting in little comments, and no one ended up doing that.
But like I would copy questions from my email into that. And the other helpful thing is that because Ann and I were both on it, sometimes like they'd ask me a question, I'd answer it from my perspective, and then Ann would come in and say like, actually this is how I see it here, or whatever, like we could further each other's answers. I do think the discussion board could work. I'm gonna try to push it in HostFX and see if they use it. And then we can kind of see if we need to keep that tab pass, if that.
Yeah, let's keep it for now and then we'll discuss again next year.
I will tell you why I would use it.
Okay.
If it's there, we'll use it in SMR and
Would you want it separate, or would you want it in all cases?
No, we should have it on there.
Yeah, just so that they get used to saying, oh, this is something I'm gonna do.
We put those feeds on the development schedule for summer, so hopefully, the features are already there, for some reason it's just not working, so we put that on the development schedule over summer, so hopefully that'll be working, and then we'll show you how to use RSS subscription.
I mean, getting the alerts was huge because
Otherwise,
it's like literally 11 o'clock before their exam. And I'm not up at 11 p.m., but I would be up at 5 a.m. And so I didn't remember what else,
Okay, so we're getting rid of documents. We're keeping gross anatomy lab and histology path lab, but those will only show up in courses where such lab sessions exist.
And we're changing the name to Histo Lab.
Histo lab. Prerequisites is gone.
Right.
Q&A exam information. Mike, what was that?
It was changes, and then it was big and announcements. So basically, it was like supplements.
What?
It would have been the supplement folder.
Supplements to what?
Additions to lectures, clarification on a concept. So lectures were made, and in response to students concerned about a topic that they felt that they didn't quite understand. So like that made like a supplementary 2-minute video to review like cerebral.
So I think it's more like course review stuff,
Yes,
right? Can we put that up with course review?
And supplemental material, and we can have two.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Sounds like one supplementary folder.
Yeah, so.
So we want to call it course review, supplemental material, or course review and supplemental?
I think we combine them, and that way we can have two separate folders. Easy enough.
So I have one for course review, one for supplemental.
No, one folder.
One for both.
Okay, and then resources, there was nothing, but it sounds like that would go into course review. Sim, I think we have to have, because that's where Ellen, Kate, and Becca do all of their Ellen, Kate, and Becca awesomeness.
Did you want to keep quiz and exam information?
No, because that's what that was.
No, so what I did for quiz and exam information was for each formative, for each summative, it was the blueprint.
Oh.
So, and it was there at the beginning of the course, so there's no question about what was coming.
I mean, that's probably more formal than the announcement setting, so that's probably a good idea. All right, so we want to keep Q&A?
So there's what it looks like. So what?
Can we do formative and summative instead of quiz and?
We just put maybe assessments as assessment
Assessments?
information.
Yeah.
Here we go. Just assessment information, and then that way also we can put anything about CSA or whatever we need in there.
Yes.
Okay, and then sim we're keeping.
Just call it assessment.
Honestly, we probably should just call it assessments. Sim we keep. Syllabus is moving into that course admin. What do we want to do about workshops? Do workshops show up under sessions, or do they show up?
I think we can just make them a section.
I think so too.
Okay.
It doesn't need it.
What's the difference between a workshop and a session?
It is, it's just a type of section.
Oh,
Yeah, it didn't follow the CBCL format,
okay.
and so we called it a workshop to differentiate it. Is all.
But it's just one other kind of section.
Okay, so then the standard tabs we have are announcements, background, course review materials, sessions, which will then break down into CDCL, roll session, workshop, gross lab, histology lab, student roster, course calendars, course administration place that'll have the syllabus, objectives, plan and study until objectives move out, discussion board, assessments, and simulation. Are we missing anything anybody absolutely needs to make their course run?
Thank you, Maureen. And is there anything else we need to figure out from the chart?
Just the naming.
Let's save that for another discussion. And let's move on to self-study packets. Okay, so for self-study packets, the first two slides I want to present of data really echo some of what Beth was saying earlier this afternoon. So I ran some numbers after going through all of these. We'll get the prize for the least, and Mike in the back gets the prize for the most. So what we're looking at here.
Oh my God.
Mike,
This isn't adjusted for space.
So what we're looking at here is the total number of pages that we expected the students to get through for each block right now, okay? So the total number throughout the entire in-one curriculum was nearly 6,000 pages worth of content.
That doesn't include videos.
No. Right, this is only self-study pages. I can see the slides, Mike. Okay? And if we do a little more of a refined analysis, here's probably a little more accurate representation. So this is the average number of pages they're getting through per week in your course.
Per week, per case, or over like 2 cases?
So I took the total number of pages divided by the number of weeks of the course.
Okay.
Okay.
So
I
All right, so do you know,
Tom's a winner here.
only because he moved renal into year 2 this year.
and so do you know for mine in particular, I decided that I wanted to combine the CBCL and CS self-studies together because I just like the fact that students have one place to go to and maybe 5 documents to access instead of 10 documents to access. So it's something I want us to consider as we're thinking through how to better organize things. And even as part of this page count, unlike the other blocks, for example, I pulled the articles the students needed and populated those articles even within the self-study packet so that it was already there. Other blocks, especially at the beginning, there were a lot of those external links where they were jumping. So those pages weren't accounted for in this particular estimation, but we'll let Marina think she's doing okay.
Wait, I have a question on that.
Yes.
I thought it was illegal for us to pull the documents and put them into a different document. And that is
So
why.
there are four main components of fair use, and as educational practitioners, we seem to fall under that umbrella of fair use for copyright issues. So from my perspective, and if you go through each of those four elements and ensure that all four elements are met, then it's fine. Based on what I've been able to look at and see, it's fine.
All right, so if I get arrested, I'm gonna tell them that Adam Wilson made me do it.
Yes.
All right, fair.
Now there are some documents, like one document that that Paul had given about ADA stuff, I believe, that was kind of a protected document. So that one was challenging to get into the packet because of password protection and stuff. So that one I had to set to the side. But other than that, all the other documents were combined into one self-study packet for each case. All right, so the next thing I did beyond page counts is I went through, and for every course, I looked in relative detail at 3 random self-study packets, okay? Because some courses might have probably 12 different packets. I wasn't going to look at all of those. So I picked 3 at random to look at, and I decided to go through and look at certain characteristics or features of those self-study packets. And the characteristics I have to pull out are those that I think are important for students to navigate these packets efficiently and effectively, and things that we started to do toward the end that they liked and kind of wanted to keep. So, for example, this first one here, actually the first 3, let's talk about these together. This is all in reference to what the students are finding on the table of contents. For example, were the video links present? As you can see, by and large, as we learned what the students needed and wanted, we were able to correct that. Just got the mic down there. So pay attention to that next time. And then for the links specifically, most of them were linking directly to the main disciplines, but it was even better when those links from the table of contents went to the sections underneath each discipline. So for example, if like in my blog, there's a lot of anatomy, right? So just linking to the main anatomy cover page really isn't sufficient. They really need to link to each specific lecture, if you will, of anatomy content. So I do want to make sure that we try to do that this next year, just to make the jumping to the key sections most efficient for the students. All right, and then by and large, most of this did include the page numbers on the document so that students knew where to find it in the large document they were scrolling through. Tom even went to the extent, I think it was Tom, of putting the number of pages of content that was that they were responsible for getting through. I think maybe Gabby may have done that as well. So that's something we can consider. So in addition to having in parentheses the video length, maybe you put semicolon 12 slides, or whatever the page count is, so that students have a better plan, have a better idea of how to plan their studies. So that was the large impetus for students wanting that, is that they would go through, kind of look at that list, see what the low-hanging fruit was perhaps, and then would tackle that first. All right, so the next stuff. So this one here, efficient and effective use of the page. So I think there's a psychological issue, if you will, where when a student opens up a self-study document, if you see that it's 400 pages, that's so depressing, right? So I've got nods in the back from the students, so they confirm. So sometimes, for example, we would have PowerPoint presentations that were converted to PDF, and each slide of the PowerPoint presentation was its own page. Is that really necessary? Probably not. We could probably condense the page number by just putting 2 slides per page, for example, okay? And that's more of what the student is expecting by way of content per page, and it gives them a better representative example of what they need to get through, I think, so from just a page count perspective. So there were a number of times where that happened, and I think that's an easy fix. If you're interested, I like to use so all of my anatomy notes, I use this program called Handout Wizard. I love the program because I just take my PowerPoint slides, convert it in this Handout Wizard to nice 2 slides per page document. What's nice about it, unlike PowerPoint kind of gives you those small boxes on the page, and it doesn't really let you expand that much at all. This allows you to expand it to use the entirety of the entire half of the bottom of the page, the upper part, lower part. So it's $40. I use it every single day when I'm putting together these packets. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy to get you that information. And it just really makes your notes look nice, especially if you have a white background and things. So it saves you a lot of time, frankly.
That actually might be something to talk to Lisa and Denise about.
Yes,
because
so-
The vast majority, they're the ones that actually format that.
So when I kind of trained them, if you will, on how to prep the documents for the BBC course, that was part of that training. I'm not sure they actually purchased the program to do that necessarily, based on looking at the self-studies that were generated, but it is an option. So yes. All right, and then minimizes external links. As you can see, by and large, as we progress throughout the year, we got much better at this. So at the forefront of the year, there were a lot of links to all these external resources. We were in fact able to kind of fix that problem, and so going forward, we anticipate that that won't be an issue anymore either. Okay, objectives is probably one we need to take some time to discuss here. So you can see there's a lot of variability. The yes/no means that some disciplines had objectives where other disciplines did not in a single document. On all of my cover pages that I made for my self-study, I just went ahead and plopped in all the objectives on those cover pages, and then the contents of that section followed for each discipline. So I think we were getting feedback from the students that they wanted the objectives from what I recall in the course evaluations. Is that accurate? If that is accurate, then I guess I would recommend that we continue to also have the objectives within the self-study packet specifically.
Are you saying in each discipline or just in the packet?
I'm saying, so the way I organized mine was the anatomy discipline. If I had 5 lectures of content, there were 5 separate sections of objectives, all on the cover page, and then they could jump to those sections and do their studying. So, and then for yours, yours were on your cover page when we got to your discipline in that same self-study packet.
So it's in the section for microbiology, not
That's
like
correct.
one bulk objective cover page in front.
That's correct.
Because I think, I agree it should be in the self-study and accessible, but I worry about dispersing it through a lengthy document, particularly thinking about the curriculum inventory. One of the problems I think that I know I had in culling and putting together all the micro objectives was literally finding them in all of the documents, because micro has been taught by at least 13 people in some way, shape, or form over the last 4 years. So it's gotten very difficult for me to find
Right,
all the
so
organisms.
to mitigate it, to help find those, that's why I just restricted it to the cover pages of the discipline, so that when you went back, you could do that. Students, do you have any comments from your perspective on one big section of objectives up front in the packet versus broken out by discipline versus broken out by even topics under disciplines?
I think topics under disciplines would be getting too close. I think either under each discipline or as a bulk document. I think as long as it's consistent all the way through, I think that's what's most important, so that we know where to look for them, rather than having to like if one discipline has it in this place, one discipline has it in another place, or like variability case to case. I think it's more consistent. I don't know.
I agree. I thought the formatting of Dr. Wilson's self-studies was helpful, where it was broken out by disciplines, that it wasn't quite as overwhelming, but it was at the top of each discipline. I think that's why. I do want to bring up, though, you earlier were saying that one PowerPoint slide per page is too overwhelming, but for our usage of osmosis can't analyze the text on the slide unless it's a full page, because otherwise it recognizes it as a picture. So we had problems where the self-study guide couldn't be analyzed for linkage to other resources if they were all put together as smaller.
So I think there are ways to get around that. So
Yes,
so
what we
if-
ended up doing is actually uploading the PowerPoint separately in order for osmosis to.
Right, so I think if there's a student representative who's responsible for some of that, as long as they have contact with the course director and can get the right formatting of those documents, I think we can fairly efficiently, easily still accomplish that.
Maureen, that's an idea for the folder that we're going to need in trial. One folder called PowerPoint. There's numerous instances that have been, especially on my end, upload pharmacology lectures as well as pathology, as well as CNS.
But aren't those PowerPoints now in the self-study?
No, the actual PowerPoint file, the PPT file. Yeah, file.
So for my block, his PowerPoints, I converted to the 2-page using that handout wizard, so yes, they were in the self-study. But then underneath the case that they were associated with, I had a separate subfolder where we had PowerPoints for Garm and whoever else.
Why do they
had
need the
also
actual
submitted some.
Yeah, why?
So some students preferred typing in the notes sections of the PowerPoints, for example.
As opposed to using like Notability or something.
Right, right, so it was student-driven, why we did that.
I have a lot of innovations. About PDF, it's just a mess, so a lot of students will come tell me.
I think for the past, no, but I think the last 3 blocks, definitely not. You guys have been all pharmacology science and most of pathology, so.
Would you rather have them all in one folder that's PowerPoint, or would you rather have a PowerPoint folder within each CBCL folder?
No, well, I don't.
Do you want a case, or do you want just a folder where all the PowerPoint files can be done?
I think case, would be.
So each session, yeah, subfolders of PowerPoint.
But I think even within that session, so like in let's go to response, we have a session that's Jamie Lopez, Lopez, and then under that, it would be kind of under Jamie Lopez. Right.
So Jamie Lopez is each section.
Right.
In that section, we have a folder that we need PowerPoint.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on. So the plan of studies, for those who may not be familiar with that, all I did is went through, and after I had all the content topics from each discipline, I kind of mapped out what would be the logical progression of learning those topics in the order we wanted the students to learn them in, then also recommended some dates by which the students would learn that content so they'd be prepared for the upcoming labs or the upcoming CBCL sessions and so on. This was really well received by the students because up to this point we were kind of giving them the packet, and sometimes the packets weren't necessarily in learning order is what I'll call it. They were kind of in order in the sense that maybe pathophysiology came first and then physiology came later. And if you don't know any better, you'll just start from the beginning and go all the way through, and then you're learning the physiology which underlies the pathophysiology later on, which isn't the best and most efficient use of time, perhaps. So that was really the goal of those plan of studies and why they were implemented. Again, I would recommend that we continue that this year now that we have a better overview of what the curriculum looks like. They're easy to put together. If you need to maintain it a week or two in advance of when the students will actually get to the content, it can easily be done with a Google sheet, and that's how I did it for most of my course this particular year. So any objections to beginning to incorporate that across the blocks?
That's fine, but I think the course guide should be in the same order that you're suggesting the plan and study. Because, I mean, now we can do it, it's been first go around, but there's no reason to put it up there.
So I struggled with that a little bit because, so like my cover pages had the objectives for all the disciplines, right? For that discipline that was the cover page for anatomy. And the cover page of physiology had all these objectives. And so if you're going to do it that way, now the objectives are tied to the topic level and not tied to the discipline level, because you're going to be, the anatomy isn't all going to come up front, it's going to be dispersed throughout whenever they get to it. Does that make sense? So the plan of study was just telling them, here's where you jump to in the packet in this order, basically. But what you're recommending is just putting the packet in that order to begin with, which I think is fine. It's just a matter of, okay, now the objectives have to tag along to each of those sessions. And you can't have a cover page necessarily anymore for a certain discipline, because under that cover page, there's only one session with the content, for example. And then down at the other end of the document, now there's an add-on. So I'm open to either way. I don't think it matters necessarily, but it would make for better continuity between the plan of study and the actual guide itself. I agree with that.
Whenever you do, this was the lesson guide over and over again, just make sure you're absolutely clear with the students what you're doing. Because I ordered all my materials and every single one of those self-studies, I didn't tell them what I was doing.
Right.
So they read it in whatever order they decided rather than the order that I actually set up. Had I had a schedule, everybody would have known.
Right.
So
I think I'm in favor of doing a plan of study, but for example, I was a terrible physiology student. So the idea of me, telling a student how long it's going to take them to get through physiology, I don't think makes sense. So I think maybe we'd have to create those in an integrated.
So it wasn't that I told them the length of time, because that was already embedded in the video link and the page link. So they had to interpret that themselves. It was just, right, it was, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, on these dates. On Monday, you need to cover, it's recommended to cover these 3 topics.
Okay.
Microbiology, this topic, anatomy, this topic, physiology, this topic. However long it takes you to get through those topics, I tried to do it in such a way that, like yours were more granular topics than most everybody else's. So I knew I could load them up on what looked to be loaded up on microbiology, even though it really only took them an hour to get through, even though there were 5 topics listed there. So I knew I could put maybe 2 more topics for other disciplines under that. So that's kind of how I tried to map out when they would do what, but didn't necessarily tell them how long it would take. Okay, and then the last thing that I mentioned already to consider is whether or not we want to combine the CBCL and CS sessions into one self-study guide. I don't even know what the right answer for this is right now because I'm not sure what the CS sessions are going to look like and how disparate or different they're going to be from what we did this past year. This past year, at least, they were kind of topically related most of the time, not always. And so in that sense, it makes good sense to keep it together as one packet. But if they're completely separate and if it's a parallel curriculum, then perhaps it needs to remain a separate packet. So that one, I think we still have to figure out once we get more information.
I kept it separate just because they were on separate days. And I felt like that made it clear. You have to know this journal of this day and this journal of this day.
Yeah. So again, that's where the plan of study comes in now. And for me, it was just I'm a number of clicks guy, right? So the fewer number of clicks, the better, and the fewer number of documents to deal with, the better. So that's why I prefer to just merge those 2 together.
I would echo that. I think if there's a plan of study, then it doesn't matter if it's separate or not. Before there's a plan of study, it was nice to be able to know what is going on that day. But if there's a plan of study, I don't think it makes a difference.
From a process standpoint, I think keeping them, I kind of at this point need to keep them separate because I have CBCL self-studies ready to go and I don't have roll session self-study ready to go. So I would like to start completing some of that workload while I'm not mid-course.
I think that, after having scheduled together, on the average, always the case, there will be 2 basic science sessions, 1 for roles or CS sessions a week. And if you're going to combine the roles or CS session with basic science, it's kind of arbitrary which one of those 2 you're going to do it with. I tend to agree with Maureen for now. They're each different sessions, and while the content will often be related to a case session that's temporarily nearby, it won't always. And so I think it's going to probably make more sense than rather to try and force together topics that don't really link as a unified topic just because they happen to be occurring the same week is going to seem actually quite unnatural. So we want to have them closely related often, but it's just not going to happen all the time. So I think if we were more consistent in that integration, which I hope we will get to over the next couple of years, I think that makes a lot of sense. But from my perspective, at least now, for sake of simplicity and also sometimes just for the clarity, I think, in what you're looking at, keeping it, here's the content for each session, pretty much. Okay, that's fine.
So for now, we'll keep those separate for good reason, I think. All right, so what I don't want us to do is leave here saying yes, and then we get to our courses and say, what happened at the retreat? I don't remember what we decided on. So this is a composite list of some recommendations. I think we've more or less agreed on all of these already. So please read through this list real quick. And if there's something that jumps out that we don't agree on necessarily, let's reach consensus. I do want to, before you actually read the whole list, if we can jump to here. What do we think about the cases, the case presentation part being in the self-study packet versus not? That one was pretty variable across the blocks as well. Any thoughts on that?
We had talked about including it in the student faculty guide for the session, which, will they get that at the same time?
They get it at 8 a.m. If we meet our goal, everything will be ready by the first day of the course for the
But
entire
will the
course.
students have access to all of that?
That's up
They'll
to
get
us to
access to
decide.
it.
I mean, we can make things accessible whenever we think it makes sense.
Because we're gonna try to have the session activities in the sessions, time opposed to the case, and makes sense to have it.
I think if that's the case, if the activities are going to tie more closely with the case, then it would make sense to have it in that same document that you're going to be working in that class session. If it's important that we are prepared to have read through that case beforehand, it would also make sense to have it within the self-study or to have it available to us beforehand. Because I know that at times, as it is now, the student guides were released the day of that session. And at that point, we're not really looking
So maybe both places, I don't know, that adds to page length, so.
So if I were a student reading through the packet, just focusing on the science of the packet, I'm not sure I'd pay much attention to the case, to be frank.
Yeah. I think it's most important to have the session.
So I actually, as part of what I was gonna talk about with the activities, was that if possible, we get rid of that separate case document altogether. And the only place the case lives is in either the faculty guide or the student guide, which is, the student guide is generated from the faculty guide. Now, I know that sometimes discipline directors like to use the patient case while they're describing whatever it is they're teaching in that, or as part of their mastery questions or whatever. So in that case, maybe we do need to release it earlier. I just know that particularly in random behavior, we had a couple problems where Mario used to be a Maria. And it, he became Mario in one case, was still Maria in the other case. Huh?
We need a transgender case.
In theory, students are supposed to read that case and be familiar with it beforehand. So
I
it's
think
nice
that
to-
depends on the discipline though. I mean, in my case, I almost never gave them anything before.
Okay, the study guide, the student guides are always available before.
So are the case documents.
But I thought that would.
But if they're in the case, if the case itself is within the student guide.
Either one's, well, the student guide's not available beforehand. The self-study is. And if you want to, right, the way we were doing it at the beginning of the year, we had a separate document of the case, and then we had the self-study. And there was actually a separate numbering system, and the very first number 1 was the case. And if you want to put it in the self-study, that's fine. But I would recommend that it be somewhere where the students can read it beforehand rather than putting
So
it.
why do they need it beforehand?
Because they should be familiar going in with what the case is, what the data is, where it's at.
Maybe, but are they realistic to do that when they have to wait?
Let's ask the packet.
I think that it depends on how you want especially the first activity to go, because especially early on in the school year, our entire first hour and a half was going through the case together and putting together a problem list, learning what a problem list was, and then writing a problem statement and talking about our problem statement. We spent a lot of time doing that, and that really dropped off towards the end of the year, and then there was almost no reason to even glance at a case beforehand, because there was not an activity that was pertinent to that. But if the expectation is coming into class, you already have a problem list and you sit down with your small group of students and you already have your problem list that you put together and now you're working together to make a problem statement, and that's the first activity, then it makes sense to have the case in the self-study guide. If that's not going to be activity 1, there's no reason for it to be there. Unless, of course, you're going to teach Keith Simmons having a heart attack and here's what's happening.
Which we did.
Which you did.
So maybe this is something that we can't pin down to a final decision.
So I'm looking at this, I'm thinking about what Beth was talking about earlier about student wellness and whatnot. I'm looking at this, and I very fondly, not fondly, recall being a medical student. Are there guardrails that we're gonna use as the faculty to determine how many hours of work do we reasonably expect the students to be able to do on a daily or weekly basis? Yes.
So.
Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Sharing.
I started compiling is how many special class hours per week we have across the 2 years. So that we can look at that and then estimate, based on what Adam has done, how much reading they're doing per week and how many hours of outside classwork we think that reasonably estimate. So, if we're at 80 hours a week, that's, I think a limit would probably.
Shouldn't have them do it more than our residents. Just say that.
Well, I think residents are working
They're
harder. No, no, the point is, when they get to be residents, they'll see like, man, this is easy being a resident. Yeah. Point being, I think, I don't know what the right number of hours is, but we need to do this for 2 years. We need to do it because it's the right thing to do. We also need to do it because LCME is going to ask us. How are we monitoring?
As the faculty.
Essentially, student duty hours, we have to monitor.
Is each course director going to give us, like, I'm assuming that, I know there's an activities team, self-study team, there are all these different teams doing things. But when I think about what did I need to do as a student to be ready for, we didn't have these kind of sessions when I was a student, but to be ready for class for small group, there was plenty of that when I was in medical school. I know that walking into class cold makes the class essentially useless. I know that well. I know that having a reasonable amount of material to digest makes the class probably very useful, right? So the question I have is, as faculty, are we all gonna be given, whether it's roles or whether it's, basic science or whatever, like guidelines? Because if you tell me, Joanna, you wanna teach professionalism, and yes, I know the LCME wants you to teach medical ethics, but you've got 30 minutes in class and we'll give you an hour of time outside of class. And that's all it should, then I can at least try to make it fit so that we can stick to all of this. And I can tell you if it's just not possible for some reason, right?
I'm wondering if Rahul's objective project could help with that, because I know once I built those building blocks, I was a lot better able to say, okay, I'm gonna teach, endocarditis. I know how many objectives are in that now. I know, because the reason I chose that is that was something I never lectured on before. It was always a lab small group thing. So when I went to put it together for them, I was kind of like, oh, I don't know how long this takes because it's a conglomeration of a bunch of things. But now I know it's 4 objectives. So I know it's, about a 35-minute self-study and maybe 15 minutes in the activity. So as a course director, if I pulled your topics and said, here are your topics and here are your objectives, how long do you think this is gonna take? Then you give me an estimation. And then I look at it and say, great, that works. Or I look at it and say, okay, I hear what you're saying, but you need to chop 20 minutes off that time. And I don't care if you chop it off in the session or here, or I say you have to chop it off here, but we'll focus on it here. It might, now that we have building blocks, better help us as course directors manage that, because the struggle I had last year was I had no clue what the rest of you were teaching. So Tom would hand me a document, and basically understanding that I can breathe in my heartbeats was really my knowledge of physiology. So I was in no way qualified to look at his material and go, Tom needs to cut material, or this is an appropriate amount.
I mean, we all have a way of doing this, and I did too. And, we just went through this process, but that's the problem is that if you really distribute the it's going to be too much work every day, no matter what you do. They're just too much. And the reason is because common sense will tell you this. We taught all those learning systems in August of year 1, all the way through February of year 2, and now it's August of year 1, all the way through mid-October of year 2. So we got all the third of the amount of time. There's only so much material you can cut. So what you end up with is a problem. Everything's compressed.
I mean, I get that, but what I'm saying is, what I'm hearing from students and what I'm seeing is that there's some of the topics I looked at, and listen, I have some capability to read and digest things, and it was probably better when I was a medical student than I is now. But I read it, I'm like, there's no way I would have been able to do this. I would have just skimmed it and been like, oh, okay,
There are limits, and we've actually set limits, but by necessity, they're too high.
We should definitely do what you're saying, Joanna.
It
I
will
don't
help
know.
us to stay within your guidelines.
Could I ask for time on here, because this is really kind of leading over to the topic for the last.
Oh,
the
sorry.
Discussion really more on the last topic, and we have students who are actually here waiting to get to the second topic on the agenda. So,
This is fascinating.
so I want to have that conversation, but I think it's really more related to what we're going to be doing for the end of the year.
So to wrap up this, so what I'm recommending is that, one, we take a break here, these Russian and stuff. And then during break, if you could just read through this and, for example, maybe I'll take off the case stuff for now. The goal is to kind of post this somewhere so that all the course directors can go back and reference it at some point once you're putting together your self-study packets, just to double check that some of these key features of the packets are present in your courses. So as long as we kind of agree on some of this, then I'll post that to wherever we think it should be posted, whether it's Google Drive or elsewhere, and that will help us to move forward with this.
Why don't I get together with you? I took notes of everything we're going through. Maybe put together a draft and say, this is what I believe we all agreed on. And then send it out to all the course directors.
Great.
Everyone checks off on that, and that will be agreed upon then format.
Okay. Sounds good. Let's take a break.
Thanks, Adam.
No, I'm just saying, let's see if we can get my stuff.
Honestly, the more I think of it, and
I'm gonna talk with Keith and Jeffrey probably about the designer process. And then as far as like best practices for putting together formatting a faculty guide, really the more important is that the course director and curriculum coordinator meeting. So let's just cut it and do that.
So I was
The checklist calendar is probably, I think if we don't have time for that.
Are we doing assessment next?
Is that something that I can also just bring up?
Yeah, we did a course recommendation.
I'm such with that. He's not I want, no, that's under.
And I was like, seriously? He's like, that's fascinating. I don't know this. I was saying.
Don't tie up. I'm the wrong person to ask. See, I'm listen, my sister like has she's like, good morning. She's like, fine. Yeah. And she, so they're telling me about this and and he makes it like this. No,
Not today. Oh.
No way.
Judith told us this was coming, and here we are.
Wait, what's happening? Are we Wait, we can leave? Yes. Is somebody spraying on fire? No. Okay.
That's a nice walk.
Oh, thank God. We didn't even make it out.
How long is this break?
They said they fire out really quick.
Fire department, sorry, I'm like walking around, exercise my muscle. We did, but I'm gonna.
And then.
So I guess what I'm getting at is that we're always going to touch and agree.
Yeah, it took me another, I started at 5. It took me like 3 minutes to get down that.
Sorry, 7. Yeah. 7 and the back show will pretty much clear.
Another 10 minutes to get up.
Way. That was loud. And loud, and loud. Oh. That almost gave me a headache.
Yeah, it was.
I think I need to go for a cup of coffee, but I should save it. I should wait. No, I should wait until the elevator traffic dies.
Where you use that back elevator? Yeah, that might transition from that.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Oh, yeah. That's our fire, it's our.
Coffee time.
Oh, man, that was bad. I did that at first.
I'm waiting. Good afternoon, steps.
Good, how are you? Yeah, some good. So,
That was good, right? You guys guys, you have fun stairs.
It shows fun stairs. We had the
Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed in that handout wizard that there are free downloads with up to 600 free prints.
But you can't save all of your settings. And
And I also noticed they had institutional.
Why don't we just buy one if a bunch of people are gonna use it? That's cheap.
Yeah, well, they say it's not limited as single address. So she can do that.
So like
You're
Friday
at a single
night.
address.
I'll make sure you have something to read on your husband.
Okay, good deal.
Where are you going?
So I'm actually in Great August Transit, which is like right before M1 prestation starts. So I'm not being close, which is fine. But we're spending a couple of days in Lincoln, Wisconsin, and then heading back here so I can get ready for it. And then after step, we're gonna go to Russia.
Go to where?
Russia.
Oh,
We're church nerds, and Russia has really cool churches.
I'm Russian.
Oh, that makes sense.
Why does it make sense?
We don't know yet. We still have time to decide. Definitely Moscow and St. Petersburg.
take the train to Kyoto.
I was watching the World Cup coverage. I couldn't tell you what a clock is today.
Yeah, they just, I
Way.
have so many slipping there. I'm gonna make together. Watch one Empire of the Tsars, all about her. So now we're all like fascinated with the history of Russia too, so we're like, well, it's not expensive, we can do it pretty, it'll be fun. Perfect.
Every once in a while, things like pop up, I'll maybe put it more and I won't be surprised.
Okay, perfect.
No,
If you
it's
wouldn't
such a
mind
backwards, you got so many.
Well, I know country is
Yeah. Way more than me. Something so far, way more. And there was ours, there was one guy in the late 19th century that tried to correct all the children.
Yeah, it's just a sign, but you're
So,
self-sufficient
you
in
know,
it.
it's something like wonder, but it really is kind of a lesson, in, okay, well, momentum will take you so far, and stop it. It's really almost impossible. Good, I'm glad, too much resistance.
Yeah, that's good. Gotta do step first.
Yeah.
Ready, not yet, but I will be.
You'll be very ready.
Sorry. But, my fiance is not fluent in Russian, but he spent a lot of time studying in college. And he is
Hi,
fluent
this
in
is
Ukrainian
Dr.
and he's becoming Russian. So he'll kind of call that into it. He's a language freak, he knows a ridiculous amount of language.
Because the signs are in Cyrillic, so
Right.
we're in capitals.
Yeah.
So people, they don't have a different, I could read it, but I can't, because it's all capitals. And the letters are different, so people are drawn out. Sometimes people translate some, they won't do all. So.
Yeah, I think he'll know enough that he'll be able to get us around, so, and hopefully it'll teach me. So I got really lost. I had the same experience. All the signage is very small. And so when we take a light rail, for example, we do like, okay, we have to figure out what our stop is called in Hebrew, otherwise we'll never know how to get across. It was fun.
The important thing
Good
is
thing
that
there's not.
there's a good possibility.
We were fine.
I mean, I guess you're also.
I don't think there's lots of.
From high school, just finished,
There still could be effects in the because there is a third party.
Yeah, it was like, all of a sudden just like turned into a whole new alphabet. Yeah.
So.
And it's
Yes, it is. I know when you get into IT, I realize, oh, change something. Now, it's like there's, this isn't really like. No, there's not, and they're gonna change it. So I know.
Man, lost a lot of people
They're
Oh, sorry, not 7. Yeah, 7, 8. Oh, but I see.
But yeah,
That's why I wrote in there.
I probably should change the assessment because one of the things that
Well, I don't know, and that's part of the thing I want to talk to you because at this
oh, I guess they just because it is so flat. Maybe that's why they don't use yeah. Yes.
and I was thinking,
Yeah, it's all written.
like, once we know it.
That makes it laugh.
Every time I feel like I appreciate it, no, you really should have something, should, yeah, I mean, at this point, I feel like we can work through. So that's where I'm at.
Only back. Yeah, right.
Stairs?
Partially. I'm glad I was
Oh,
not.
that's smart. You made it halfway up and then took the elevators and you're like.
Oh my gosh, I was
That's brilliant.
I was going down to the place during that little break to get my lunch. And I'm glad I wasn't on the ninth floor when the alarm went off. Because someone would have had to get an ambulance to come get me. I don't have my stair walking shoes on.
Case, it's everything's exactly the same. Instead of pressing control,
use command.
I'm excited about the meeting next week. I've done some of those embedded surveys.
Oh, nice.
I've been playing with it.
Like within the email?
Not yet. I haven't actually employed it. I just
it.
built them. And so I'm excited.
You can fire test emails to yourself.
Yes. I did. I did one, and I'm like, this is so cool. So and then Bill and I did tests the Entrada poll. It looked really easy.
Okay.
Now, I don't know how it is from the user end, like from recipients, because I'm not part of the membership yet, but to one of them. But it looked really easy too. So
And the one thing we really don't like about Entrada polling is that it doesn't. None of their surveys have survey logic. I'm going to use survey logic all the time. If you're like asking one yes or no question,
yeah.
like polling there's.
oh, but your whole questions are much more complicated. Now, does it take you since you do polling? I'm sorry, when you do the polling, is it embedded in an email, or does it take you to Entrada to answer? Okay, so that's the part he and I were trying to figure out. So for right now, I'm just gonna use, we have a couple of, we're gonna have a couple more coming up after I get done with all of these and schedule everything. I'm gonna just, use Gizmo for now. And then, but I'm gonna try to figure out, because if we can do that, that'll be much simpler since we're trying to get, yeah. So,
Yeah, let me know how it works. I'm
okay.
looking forward to learning. You let me know when you want to start.
Actually, all the course corrections. So that's the most critical. Yep. They're not.
We'll Jeffrey and Joanne a bunch of coffee. They brought Roble this time instead of just picking up his coffee.
We might just get started.
Yeah, you can join us.
Yeah, you guys come over.
I can use that this way.
That's it. That was a good one, too.
Oh, that's great, thanks. Jealous.
Now we're kidding about it. Contraband.
Mike, I take back every best thing I've ever said about you.
Now, what could you possibly say bad about him?
You're right.
Don't fill it in a box.
I don't have the time.
This is the problem with Mike, is that he's so darn likable, that even when you. It's just dented, right?
No, that's it. Oh, right. Sorry. No sense. No food. I have more questions.
Mark, you leading this or Bob leading?
Mark's leading it right there.
Okay.
Oh, hey, Mark, before, I didn't get a chance to say something about the lack of enthusiasm for the case studies. This is a case-based curriculum. I think the case should be available in whatever form, whatever abbreviated form we're going to use in CBCLs or some form, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. It's time-based exercise, it's clinical medicine. If we stop doing that, we might as well just have to give money. So that's what's wrong with the cases.
Did someone write that down?
No.
Okay, not my department.
But people say they're looking at NATO, and people said that maybe we'll put it at the end. I think that to give context, to have maybe an abbreviated form at least, right at the start, somewhere that will give us some context. And maybe in more lay terms of the full cases, not for the appropriate agenda.
I would agree with you from a student perspective. The meeting we were just in before we came here, we were trying to remember which, there was an instance where we were trying to figure out which case with a certain topic. And yeah, and it was one from vital fluids and gases, and we remembered it specifically because it had been integrated into the actual instruction. And I think that helped us pinpoint where the material was in a way that was really special.
To echo, I think like sometimes maybe an abbreviated case would be good if we're gonna try to like go through and make a problem list of diagnosis, because once it gets to be really clear what the diagnosis is, it's hard to go back and like do that activity with like a fresh mind when you're like, well, like it's so clearly obvious that it is this diagnosis, and I know that it's important like when developing a diagnosis to consider all the other options as well. But I think at our level, once we know the answer, it kind of takes away from that
So
activity
maybe
process.
withhold the second part of the case, some of the diagnostic results and that kind of thing, and just give you the history of flow exam.
Or even just a history of present illness to start with.
Okay.
been saying this for years. I think it's a fantastic idea.
Because we actually have trouble coming up with a differential because we have too much information that excludes all the other possibilities.
All the time. Tell them they have an MI and you're like, what's differential? MI. No, it's not a differential, it's a diagnosis and we gave it to you. If you take it away and force the process.
We started out, with, you guys might have remember the first few cases with VFU, we actually didn't give a diagnosis, we just gave the history with physical. And eventually we changed it, I can't remember why, but there were certain things in the pathway that helped strongly issues. And
Well, we're not gonna do that in city skills, sure. That's another way to get that piece out.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be the same way every time.
It doesn't have to be, but if we're gonna have an activity, for that activity to be useful, the differentials on, we should just get. Yeah.
So you also said you didn't want to all the time developing that, some of those city skill sessions you wanted to work on.
No,
So you may want something up front in those cases, and we're just gonna spend time on problem differential developing that, then just get.
And it doesn't, I don't think that's necessary for every case, but especially like vital fluids and gases, for example. All of the heart stuff felt kind of similar and it felt like it was running together. So actually like having an activity where you have someone presenting with a cardiac ailment and then you have to parse out and try and differentiate and figure out what the difference is and why it's this and not this, like that would be a really useful thing for that kind of case. Whereas when it's like super straightforward and it's like clearly one thing, that's less helpful.
It doesn't necessarily always have to be the same, but like maybe a short of HPI ahead of time if we're gonna have an activity that's gonna take us down that road. If there's not gonna be an activity like that, then giving us cases.
And this is why I think it's so important to modify the cases based on what we're doing in the session, and which is why I've stopped writing cases 2 months in advance, because we haven't decided on the session yet. So that's why the case wasn't matching up with the activities. So I'm told, if I haven't done a case, it's not because I'm trying to slack off and not do it, I'm just waiting for input. So if you guys have something specific you want me to do in the case, then just tell me. Then I'm happy to adjust or just write something new.
the problem, it's not a problem, it's just that it's an iterative process. Very rarely talk about this the other day. If you give us something to work on, we can probably look at it and go, okay, well, here's my material, I can do it next day, this and that, and then we can go back and forth a little bit. I think we always try to do that.
Sure.
And you can write a full case, and all we do is cut out the part that gives the diagnosis, and do it after the session.
So I think you might want to have this conversation with Keith. Keith's taking over session activity. So I think, and he's written a lot of the cases, and I know I was talking with Jeffrey that Jeffrey and I are going to meet with Keith to kind of do that transition. And I think once Keith's kind of apprised, we might have some recommendation as to what to do with the case. So I don't know, we might want to table this until Keith is engaged.
Maybe have a separate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another good resource to tap into is the SIM team, because this is what they do regularly, right? Their challenge is to write cases in a way that they bloom over the encounter and that they don't give away too much or too little at the very beginning. So talk to Ellen, Kate, Sarah, Hawk, and Shanu.
And Jamie.
And Jamie, yeah.
Shanu's
Jamie's,
still trying to come out?
well, Shanu's taken off, but
No, I know. She
she's still around. She was sending me emails this morning.
Kate,
Finley, Ellen, Kate, Jamie, and Sarah Hawk for now, because Shauna's taking off. But the three of them are super skilled at doing this sort of thing. Okay, so for assessment stuff, I want to echo absolutely everything Adam said in his presentation about workflow and timing. So the same things that we were struggling with in content development is the same things that we were struggling with in item development, if not more acutely, because typically people would get their content done and then move on to item development. So we were even tighter this year on item development. There were obviously like huge demands on you guys this year, both in terms of content development, but we weren't able to tap into the bank in the same way that we were in previous years because we added 2 new types of assessments, right? We added the readiness assessments and then we added the formatives, and that just like created huge demands on item development. To support some of that, Rahul budgeted for us to have a faculty assessment team. And that's specifically composed of, so Syed's going to be leading that team. And then there's going to be 3 or 4, I think there's 4 clinician educators on there. And sort of their job is to be a transit point for faculty-led item development. So their job is basically to work with all the discipline directors and course directors to bounce stuff back and forth. And then Jeffrey is going to be involved with that as well, with respect to managing workflow, and Maria is as well. They're just getting onboarded. We're just training them, so we're not really sure exactly how that workflow is going to work out yet. But they're going to be another resource for you guys if you need help with vignette development, whatever it is. I think altogether they have, the whole team has a 0.6 FTE. So they're there for you 3 days a week. Like you have a full-time person helping you with item development basically 3 days a week. Yeah.
So when we have to develop items for whatever it is, professional, can I write an item and have them edit it?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I think part of it is like the content. I know the content. I know what I want to test, but they, after a while, will probably get very good at understanding how to write it so that we're testing the right content.
Yeah. So the idea for them is to, 1, help integrate across disciplines, for them to help develop really good clinical vignettes, and also to primarily serve as sort of an editing point, so for you guys to bounce ideas off of with item development. If you need them to do primary item development, they can help you with that as well. I think it's going to take them a little bit longer to do that. They're also not like the deep content experts that you as the discipline directors are. So their job is really in integration and editing and workflow function. And if the workflow's not working, we can adjust it as we go. We're just onboarding them, so like we don't know what the team we're working with is like yet. So once they get on the ground, it'll be more clear. But they're basically there as a resource for you guys. Thoughts, concerns, anything about how you would like them to do?
I don't know if this is business of the assessment. At some point, it would be nice to have practice reviews with students, because I got this question frequently, and I know that I would have liked to have produced them myself, but couldn't bring myself to ask the faculty to intimidate the lives.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be the same way this year, because we're turning out so many.
So we're going to present a proposal for what is not going to be a readiness assessment anymore, but is going to be a case sort of assessment, with the idea to give students more practice on the case as a whole. Yes, I think we're already sort of running the Rolls Royce of the assessment curriculum, right? Like we have 3 layers of low stakes assessment, like in the course. And so I think we're giving a lot already. And I think what you'll see in this thing around practice questions and around how we propose to redo the mastery questions will address quite a bit of that. And if you think that it still doesn't, then let's talk more about that. Anything specifically in response to the faculty team until they get on the ground? Anything you want us to be training them on that you in particular need help with?
How to edit. But I think I know for me, I don't expect anybody to know anything about pediatrics besides, whatever, but I know it would be very helpful for me, if somebody can spot the test wise, all that stuff, if I don't catch it, editing.
I'd like them to keep an eye out for when they write questions that may affect other disciplines. Like any other team, they're going to have items that they write that they think is testing a pathophysiology component. But one of the things I've noted this year is that people love to use micro to test their content. And then we wind up with an exam where we've tested strep in 12 questions. And that's a bit unbalanced then. So being aware of when they've created a multidiscipline item and using that, because that's good, but then we need to balance the other items.
Yeah, the other thing I would suggest if it works is, my experience with the previous M2 curriculum, the way that they did their summative assessments is basically all the course directors and or discipline director people sat together and went through as a group every question item.
Yeah.
And I sat through a lot of those, and I'm not a pathologist or a pathophysiologist or a pharmacologist, but I like to think of myself as reasonably intelligent and somewhat knowledgeable person. By looking at the questions with fresh eyes, sometimes I would see something that seemed like an ambiguity in the question. And so I think just by having someone who has, smart and knowledgeable, they don't have to be a true content expert, but they can read a question and say, oh, this could be interpreted in some other way. And the more people that look at that, the more chance they'll pick up on that ambiguity. Because I think we found in pretty much every summative this year, there were probably at least a couple of questions where there were some ambiguities that nobody really considered.
And that again reinforces Adam's point about just like looking at content from a non-expert perspective. We want items looked at from a non-expert perspective as well as an expert perspective. If we can get ahead of the timeline,
that's always the trick.
All these issues will go away, right? We'll be able to have meetings earlier on. Maria's been running those meetings before like big summative assessments, right? To get everybody's eyes on it before things. We can do that with all of our other assessments as well. We just need to get ahead of the timeline. And hopefully with when the content stuff gets fixed on that timeline, then I'm not even going to suggest that we start with assessment first, because I know that's probably not achievable at this point where we are. Another thing is the budget for remote proctoring went away. And I think you were all in there when we were planning the calendar, like everyone here already knows about that. So we're going to be running formatives the same way that we ran it for a couple of years with the current M3s, which is we're going to administer an Insta debrief. And that worked super well for a few years. And we were offering the remote proctoring as a luxury, but it ended up being, I think, more of a nuisance than a luxury. So we're getting rid of that. The final thing, and we have Abigail and Savannah here. You guys familiar? Sorry, Abigail and Savannah are. I think you're familiar with everybody else, right? You encountered everybody in some way.
Except for probably Jeffrey.
Yeah, hi.
So they're here as representatives of the student assessment team that's composed both of rising M2s and M4s. If you remember a few years ago, we had a student assessment team that had rising M2s, now they're M4s, and we have a few students from that team who decided to come back. That group is going to be mentoring this new group, but they're in terms of item development, they're going to be working more or less on separate things. There are things that are coming up in the curriculum for the M2s that we obviously don't want to expose that group to. All the students are under a non-disclosure agreement, obviously, to protect the items. But so the M4s are mostly going to be working on stuff that you need help with that you don't want the M2 team to see. So Tom has some renal cases. Maureen has some cases coming up in coming blocks that she wants help with item development for. And then also, if you'd like to let those M4s into some of your formatives or summatives, you're welcome to do that. You're not required to by any means. Again, this team is there as a resource for you for whatever needs you have. So we've been training the student team all week. There's 10 students on the rising M2 team, and because we knew that this meeting was coming up, we fast forwarded our conversation because we know this year we've had some issues with how the mastery and readiness assessments were rolling out. Right, we tried sort of the Harvard model. We tweaked that. We have a year now of data about how that worked, how that didn't work, and I think we can refine the model. So I'm going to pass around a proposal that this team put together. There was diligent sort of conversation around this. We had 2 hours. The groups there's 10 students. They were split into 2 independent groups of 5. They talked completely separately for a couple hours, talked through the issues. There's obviously a lot of complexity around here. There's not a perfect ideal solution. And then, there's obviously complexity because it reaches into group dynamics. It reaches into participation in session activities, into individual responsibility for using assessment in the right way. I think you guys are all familiar with all of these issues. We've talked about them before. So this is a distillation of a couple hours of those 2 teams of 5 discussing, and then another 2 hours of whole group discussion and coming to a consensus statement. So here's the proposal, and we'll take a few minutes to read through it. We've distilled it down to basically a page, and then we'll talk about some of your your concerns and if you think that this is a viable plan.
Thank you.
So it looks like the majority of people have gotten through the proposal. So I guess let's open it to discussion. If you have specific questions about why particular elements are in the proposal or what thought processes went into proposing the things that the team proposed, we're all here to talk about it.
Can you explain the Exemplify review process and who's did you agree to?
Yeah, so the Exemplify review process is basically after they finish their assessment, they go into another secure file that lets them see what they got right and wrong right away. So it's like an insta debrief.
The rationale.
Yeah, exactly.
And then who leads the group debrief?
That's something that we had talked about, and the reason that well, you can't see the red, well, see where it's lighter. The students, I think, were at some point concerned about that the debriefs were taking so long in the classroom, and that they weren't, that they didn't take into account individual performance, right? So some students just do great, and they feel that they don't need the debrief. So the group had proposed an option to stay, and the debriefers would be other classmates. And it seems like from conversation that a lot of the time, most of the questions during debrief with readiness assessments, the way they're running now, were resolved among peers anyway, with later, the clinician educators weighing in or the discipline directors sort of weighing in as well. I think that part of the proposal is the least sort of worked out about what that debrief looks like. My concern, and the reason that I put the option to stay in red, and please Savannah and Abigail comment on it, but my concern is the messaging that we're going to send about we're here as a group, and so it's not just about your individual performance, right? You're contributing your brain to the group as well. So perhaps making it still required to, for people to stay, rather than just, okay, well, I performed great on it, I'm out, So, but that's open to how the debrief is, who does it and how it's led and how we close the loop basically at the end of the day. Mike, you had already been experimenting a little bit with decoupling the mastery questions, right, from the readiness assessment, so.
Haven't recovered yet. Bringing up my PTSD. So what purpose do the mastery questions now serve other than to become practice questions?
That's it.
Students have found it an enormously valuable study tool. Because the enormity of the amount of information that we're given in a case without any direction about kind of highlights or relative level of importance, there's no way to, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know how to prioritize what's important, what's not important, unless we have some guidance of like, here's some things to think about, like here's some guiding questions that you should be asking yourself.
It's very good, like a self-assessment tool, but when we were discussing this, we felt like the readiness assessments taken directly from the mastery questions as they are is not really testing our understanding of the material, it's testing our ability to memorize the answers to questions that are given to us, which at this level, many of us can do fairly well without actually understanding any material going into the session.
I have 3 questions. First, yes, at this point, toward the end of your M1 year, you guys definitely run a debrief of a quiz and identify where you guys are at with each other and where the deficits are. Because I'm early, I'm worried about Jamie Lopez when you walk in and the assessment ends and it goes, okay, debrief each other. So I think some development needs to happen with the students. 2, I'm a little concerned with the mastery questions. I know you guys say it's been an enormously helpful study tool. I'm also a little worried that it was a source of stress for students. So I'm hoping that the decoupling might help that. And I'm assuming that's why you guys proposed it, but just something to keep in mind. And then the third one, in here it says that the mastery questions can take a variety of other forms, not just MCQ, open-ended, response, fill in the blank, etc. Currently, mastery questions have all been open-ended, which I think was enormously helpful to Lisa and Denise in formatting them. If we start throwing a wide variety of formats at them, we either need to provide enrichment for them, or perhaps assessment team could help with creating those documents for the students. Because even like as a course director, Jeffrey taking on the lion's share of the administration side, I'm gonna mess that up.
I think what we meant by that was, remember at the beginning of the year when we were fully coupling, we insisted that first all of the readiness assessment questions, all the mastery questions are first really developed as readiness assessment questions, and we pull from that pool. We realized it's unsustainable because writing that many multiple choice questions, and sometimes that format doesn't translate. So I think the idea is that they're always open-ended, right? But then the answer is provided, whatever.
Another format.
It's right, in another format. So this really would be like a book chapter, right? There's questions at the end of the chapter, and then you flip to the.
I just want us to be aware of the potential logistical issues. I like the plan. There could be some logistics, and logistics are, I think, what we struggled with the plan we enacted this year. I mean, Mike, I think that was kind of where, like, we had trouble getting certain disciplines to follow.
So I guess we're also happy then to provide, as Adam's providing for the content, we can provide a checklist for the mastery stuff and include it just at the bottom of the content, right? Because it's going to be part of that self-study packet anyway. We can add some more checklist items about how mastery, let's call whatever we want to call them, whatever mastery questions, self-study questions, practice questions, how those are going to be formatted, right? That they have to have, that their question, there's a question mark at the end, or it could also just be explain the mechanism of blah, 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 period, right? Like we don't have to be as strict in that formatting as we are with multiple choice questions, but for the purposes of the coordinators, yeah, we need to be consistent for them. And then how the answer sheet is put together as well, right? That it has to have the answer, but then it has to have the rationale as well.
Okay, can someone talk a little more about, a little bit about process, I guess. So the assessment would not be a readiness assessment anymore. I forget to call it something different, obviously, post-case assessment or something. So I guess my biggest concern is because anatomy usually doesn't align very well with the case content. It looks like you're saying that it's okay to still include that type of question in the post-case assessment. That's what we're calling it. I just wonder how, I think misleading is the right word, but I mean, you're so focused for 2 to 3 hours on the case, and that's kind of what that's the main focus for the session. Now all of a sudden you're assessing something different than that. I guess, what do we need to do on our end to ensure that we are explicit about what we assess? So you mentioned the blueprint. I don't think we provided a blueprint for the IRX before necessarily.
What I think our thought process was by having it at the end, you can add a level of complexity to your questions, you get a better idea of where you're at after the case moving forward. But there also needs to be some accountability for material that wasn't necessarily covered in the activities, which is why if you're just straightforward about it beforehand, about half the questions will come from like session level activities, material that you should have learned and discussed, and like our thought process with that would increase group engagement, because it's important that you're engaging with these activities, engaging with your group in order to perform well on this post-case assessment. But there also needs to be accountability for something like anatomy where there's not necessarily an activity or it's not necessarily inherently tied to the case, but you were responsible for that material going into that session.
So one thing from a kind of debrief perspective, well, that was nice with having it at the beginning is that it allowed me to circulate through the rooms to ask specifically, did anyone have problems with this question? And it gave me 3 hours worth of time to get to those rooms to address those questions. At the end, if you're doing a debrief then, how do you envision the faculty really being there to address those gaps?
Could that be part of the pre-brief? I mean, at the beginning of this year, each group elected a student representative. So maybe that student representative takes notes of things that showed up in the debrief that can then be addressed at the next session.
The other thing we had discussed this a little bit in that the faculty would then have item performance stuff that then you can send out an email at the end saying like, hey, or in the discussion board saying, hey, 90, most items were above 90% or whatever. There's one thing where you guys still at the end of the case are still struggling on. Let me clarify this concept for you.
So you're thinking electronically advanced.
Or pre-brief if it makes sense temporally, right? But sometimes you want to close that loop like right there and then, but maybe you guys can comment on that a little bit, because we have talked about that.
Yeah, we did talk about like a couple different options, and logistically, they're all a little bit different. Something that we had talked about, but kind of maybe dismissed based on logistics, and correct me if I'm wrong here either, but we like had talked about having, like being able to just have faculty, I mean like item security is an issue with this, but being able to go have the faculty in there, so like when you leave and you're still confused about something, maybe you can't bring up that item exactly, but you can go to this room after the session and ask your individual question to that faculty member. And that's a protected time issue, that's an item security issue logistically, but that was one idea.
They just have office hours, protected office hours sort of at the end.
Another idea we floated last year that just didn't get much traction, but maybe would get more traction in this type of scenario setup, was a video debrief by the experts of the questions. So, and maybe I'm misthinking here, but I felt that most of the time, if the expert was in the room debriefing the question, giving you even more context than was in the rationale statement, it seemed to be more acceptable and more understandable than if the clinician educator was just trying to read that rationale statement to follow through, so to speak. So could that be a way of helping to ensure that there's better understanding from the experts specifically?
I think as long as it was, so one thing is with these items, we want to protect them, right? For this year. No, but I'm saying you could pre-record it, right? Like if you have the debriefs then, and you can't be physically in all places at the same time, you could basically pre-record some debrief stuff.
And the debriefs are going to be occurring at different times now, since they're at the ends of the sessions. Some sessions we're running it an hour and a half for whatever.
Yeah.
Others we're running it
We can treat those debriefs as secure materials that are stay within the classroom as well.
So what if like there's an assessment that has content from me and Tom in it? So you're suggesting like before that, me, you and Tom sit down and record our debrief of that quiz.
You can make a little video for one item.
Clinical educator then would play the video for anyone that wanted to stay and see the faculty level debrief. Is that the thought? Because I honestly think there's something really cool, even though I'm worried about it in post-defense, of the students running their own debrief. I think that the learning opportunity there of students being their own educators and driving their own requirement to know the material rather than us requiring them to know it, them requiring themselves to know it is really cool.
So I see that really, I see it only, not only working, but working best, I guess, for the case-related content, because you would have just gone through it and would have had more richer discussions about that particular material. Whereas the material that is coming up from the self-study alone, I'm not sure they'd have those rich discussions to be able to do that.
Well, no, go ahead.
Specifically for academy, my experience has always been, at least with the readiness assessments, that there's always like one or two people who are really on top of the anatomy for that case in any group I've been in the entire year. And so it might end up being that as an assessment tool, the proportion of students getting the anatomy questions in particular correct might be lower than the things that are activity like covered in the activities. But I don't think that that precludes the possibility that there's a kid who's on top of that anatomy who will be able to debrief that item and actually really generate good discussion.
I get that, but we also have to ensure continuity between all four classrooms.
And that way your debrief is correct.
So what I would like, my response to what we were saying before is that oftentimes we, as students, would kind of end up self-debriefing amongst peers as it was now, and we didn't have these strong discussions beforehand anyway. So I think that based on history, I think that that wouldn't make as huge of an impact of
of differentiating between debriefing items that were from self-study versus from activities, just based on like my prior experience of going through a debrief for a readiness assessment where we haven't discussed any of this yet, but there was an item and people were confused about it. And what ended up helping the most was like my student saying, oh, like when I read it like this, and this is how I went through this process of this question. And so I think that it wouldn't necessarily, there wouldn't be such a dichotomy between self-study questions and activity-based questions.
The idea also is that the activity-based questions would be slightly more complex, whereas the ones that aren't covered in the activities would necessarily, because there isn't an expected total mastery of that material, might be a little bit less complex.
Would the students be willing to put together a question list and then publish that to additional directors with a expected turnover time, getting it back to you either by video or by some common form?
I think that's kind of what the pre-brief
That's the
is,
pre-brief.
right?
What way you could.
Oh.
But the, the students, when they're done, the problem is they're finishing at different times, right? They then come up with what's left. What do they need to have explained, or rather than us create videos, what we think we might need to have explained?
Well,
I think going back to Dr. Jukes' idea of having one, like the student who's elected to represent their group, kind of be the one to shoot off an email saying, like, here's the item that our class had trouble with, and we'd like further explanation. I don't think that would be hard to accomplish.
I mean, we don't need discussion around that because we see how the item performed really, right? Like we know exactly where the pain points were. Huh?
And of course, we want to explain things as quickly as possible in real time to the students who have a question. If they all have a question, right? They don't think it's an important question to ask. Then why should we necessarily pick what we want to talk about? I better pick what you want to talk about, what you want me to talk about, and then respond to that. And then also, it's the learning process of creating your own questions that are coherent. Specifically, what do you want to have explained to you? And that's a process that should be tasked, that should be to me. When you get to the third year, you're going to have that as a movement, that you come with questions and we pay attention. Why not start with that?
Like I said, I have questions and observations maybe. So I think first to get to Adam's point, I think there's going to be a considerable amount of content, whether it is closely related to or easily related to a case or not, it's not going to be a part of the case section. So gross anatomy, I understand there are intrinsic reasons for making that difficult, but there'll be pathology and pathophysiology bits in there pre-reading. It's not going to be touched on because it's 10 questions here. They're not going to be assessed on everything. So I think that my question in a sense is if there is a larger pool of what we've been calling mastery or study questions, that even though those may not be part of the end of case session quiz, whatever we're going to call it, that would still give you hopefully sufficient guidance or practice of understanding what or what is not important, even if it does not show up on that quiz. So that's kind of a question to.
And I want to piggyback off of that if I may, Bob. So I'm looking here at this pre-brief session about 10 to 20 minutes. Right now I'm thinking we kind of have that pre-brief session built into the debrief of the readiness assessments, right? But that's a standardized debrief of those items specifically. If the students walk in the room and start trying to ask these clinician educators any question from the self-study, you can believe they're going to stand there like deer in the headlights and not be able to answer some of these more nuanced questions. And so, back to Bob's point, I'm wondering if we perhaps use
sorry,
these
Adam, that was intended not for the clinician educators. That was intended for peers, and then for whatever remaining questions there are for you guys as the content experts when you're circulating through the rooms to close out.
The problem is once you get to those rooms, some people can leave, some people can't, some people want to stay, everybody, I found empty rooms.
He's talking about, so while we want to
So let me frame this a little bit because we were talking about this in the context of traditional TBL, right? So in the traditional TBL model, you have an IRAT, you have a GRAT, and then the debrief is led entirely by the group of learners that are in the room, because we have more content. The clinician educators are more content experts than typically run a TBL anyway, right? Like often TBLs are just run by facilitators who have no content expertise at all. They're literally just there to facilitate stuff. And typically the debrief or the pre-brief or whatever, any sort of knowledge sharing is done by peers or learners in the group. Now our groups are smaller, right? Typically in traditional TBL, it's giant where you have like 60 something people in the room and tables of 4 to 6. We have less brains in the room, like 16 to 17 than 60, 65 or 70. But it sounds like those needs are sort of being met with, and that's enough brains in the room, it sounds like. So the idea was basically to skip the GRAT portion, the GRAT administration, but still have the GRAT-like process, debriefing the IRAT. Does that make sense?
But you don't have an IRAT, but they haven't been tested yet.
No.
So, no,
I finished the point I was gonna make.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of some of what you're suggesting and how we might address it actually would relate to our earlier discussion of trying to make greater use of the discussion boards. So in this kind of modified GRAT debrief, when there is, or IRAT debrief, when you're doing it on your own, there will be, even as a result of that, probably still some unanswered questions that you amongst your peers still won't be able to answer. And you could put them, you can table those for the moment. You'd have the opportunity, as Mark suggested, of bringing them up when content experts are available in the room, or posting it to the discussion board. You know what, that even though you only have 17 or 18 people in the room, if you're actively using the discussion board during that 20 minutes, the entire class could be part of that whole class or the half class that's engaged at that time in a virtual group.
During the pre-brief, you mean?
Yeah, essentially, they could be not just the 18 or 20 people in the room, it could be the half of the class. It's all, although you're in 4 separate rooms, you could be in the same discussion board altogether and say, hey, we're working on this one. Nobody understood how this drug that Dr. Broderick told us about, how it doesn't make any sense to us. This, what do you guys think? And so that could be something the whole class is working on together. So it doesn't have to be limited to that. And then things that are still not resolved.
This is a pre-brief, so there's nothing.
Yeah, and I think this addresses what you were saying, is it encourages the students to come up with their own questions, but it's also encouraging it to answer themselves to the best of their ability.
It does.
And then to the extent, that there's still things left over that nobody comes to a resolution of, you still will have at some point, discipline or content specialists come to the room, or if it's still, or on a discussion board that they will answer, or if it will get farmed out by the course director later that day or the next morning or something.
But even real time.
Or in real time.
And the thing is that the morning group will have their, hopefully, answers right away. And then the afternoon group will come up with maybe some different things. They wouldn't get shared the answers from the morning yet. The afternoon group has another opportunity with different minds to either come up with answers or have different questions. And then I think everybody should get the answers to both of those questions. So it really makes it richer, and it does give you guys more opportunity to create the self-directed curriculum that we're trying to create.
The problem with just is that you've got a group that finished in the morning after an hour and a half, and they're posting their questions. You've got students who haven't taken it yet later in the morning, and you've got a whole half of the class who can do it. Your protected questions. And so,
But the discipline directors are in the room, aren't they? Is that the way?
I'm talking about using the discussion board to generate a conversation.
I agree, but
At the
we don't.
beginning of
At the pre-brief, we're talking about pre-brief.
Before you ever look at the course assessment,
Okay, I'm sorry.
or the case assessment.
That's fine.
And then, but we can still withhold the publishing of our answers until the afternoon group gets a chance to ask questions. And we'll publish all of them.
The idea is not to publish beyond that room, not to publish beyond the room to protect that item bank.
Well, but I thought the questions were going to be not necessarily what's the answer to this question? What's A, B, C, or D? I don't know. It was about what do you not understand about this material? And what do you need to have explained to you? Okay?
Well, and I think even in response to a low performing question on a case assessment, you can provide an explanation of a concept without giving away a question. And that's not a difficult thing. That would just have to be something that all Americans are aware of, that this is secure content. We have to be careful in how we explain. We can't just take, well, it was D for this answer, for this reason, but I think everybody is smart, so they're capable of figuring it out.
So it sounds like we can use the discussion board to do both pieces, right? The first piece is perhaps during the pre-brief, we can use the discussion board to document, as basically an inventory of stuff that students still don't understand after getting through the self-study document. And then at the end of the session, that discussion board can also be a place, instead of email, as I suggested earlier, can be a place where discipline directors or content experts, based on looking at how items performed, or if students still have residual questions, can deliver additional information, or they could put it into the supplementary resources folder that we discussed, or whatever, right? The point is to close the loop super quickly, right?
And it keeps us from trying to go from real fast over a short period of time and try to catch everybody still there. You asked me a question about one of the questions that you couldn't get right. Well, I'm going to say the same thing there, but only you. And the other three rooms aren't being here. I think that's been an inconsistency so far.
I did have one quick question of you guys. As I rotated through the rooms and all the blocks, it was very typical for me to see a group and a group of 3 people would be working on the case, and one person would be sitting off over here looking really pissed off and frustrated, studying the material. And it does worry me a little bit if you put the assessment at the end, that that's going to encourage that to happen more often, because that's where the grade is. And so we know no matter how little it counts, that's what we're going to do.
We talked a lot about that, and that's why we wanted to make questions of a higher level of complexity when they're specifically related to group activities, because you can study that self-study material all you want, that's only going to be 50% of the questions, and if you're not engaging in the group activities and really going through them and discussing them with your group, then you're going to not perform as well on those more activity-related items. And so that was our kind of idea.
We also discussed that as assessment team, it's a little bit outside of our purview, but that we really think from the student perspective that there has to be some kind of peer accountability, peer review process in place in coming years, because every single person in the discussion had experienced that one person that was often not doing what they were supposed to be doing. And sometimes it's, an isolated, that person had a bad day, and sometimes it's a recurrent problem. And that's really something that assessment can't really deal with. And so we have to kind of try and inculcate a culture of accountability between peers. And that's a whole other discussion of how to do that without making it, I'm just destroying this person in my evaluation of their personal character.
To create that responsibility of preparation.
It was, but now because the RAs at the end, basically, and it counts for the grade, you'll have students that will come in and study during the session.
I'm being a little more basic about where that should be.
We talked about that. We talked about quite a bit, and I think for the way that we're using these assessments, it's really not a readiness assessment, right? Because the way that readiness assessments were designed before is that the readiness portion is almost entirely constricted to the activities that you're going to, right? It's readiness for the activity. If you draw a circle of our universe of content, 200 pages or whatever you want to call it, that we're delivering to them, the activity is like, it's a blip on the screen, right? So we're really not using it as a readiness assessment. Yeah. Like we should stop using the word readiness assessment.
Yeah.
Period. It's not what we're doing.
How are you going to compel people really to participate with knowledge?
Well, that's why we wanted to sample not only questions from the activities, but questions from the self-study material, so that you have to equally favor participating in the activities with your group so that you can perform well on the questions related on the post-case assessment related to the activities, but also you're going to get questions sampled from the self-study material, and you're not going to know necessarily what the activities are beforehand, what that is, so that creates the accountability to come prepared for those questions at the end.
Okay, and I like that idea, but we have to then be held to making sure that we have meaningful questions about the activity. The activity has to be meaningful. That's the ability to give the schools to have meaningful activities. I think that's a great idea.
It does worry me just a little bit. If I was to, I didn't know how to do this, which I'm not. But if I was, I'd study while my classmates were working on it, and then the debrief for the session question would come
I
up.
have to say, this is a discussion that we had a little bit in the clinician educator boot camp the other day. We're talking about professionalism. I'm a professional role leader, so I get to talk about this all the time. But I think this really speaks to we as faculty and the clinician educators also need to lay down the expectation to the students. When you are sitting somewhere, I understand you don't want to sit there for 4 hours and do this. But listen, you have a responsibility to you guys need to hold your peers accountable, and we as faculty need to hold you guys accountable.
Precisely, and actually that was a big part of our discussion as we were kind of working our way through these issues of we have to, there's no way, there's gonna be the person sitting in the corner studying on their own, regardless of when the IRAD is, it doesn't matter.
The way it is now.
The thing is, we have an obligation to set expectations about professionalism and then hold people accountable.
This is
and that's
the
like a
model
whole.
they're gonna operate in for the rest of their careers. Right. We all know this in the hospital. If you don't work in a team, you don't work, period. It just doesn't work.
The other way I look at it, I'm worried that you're making your tasks more difficult by putting it in. But having said that, I'm being argumentative because this shouldn't be a deal breaker, and maybe I should just shut up.
No.
That's a no, this isn't.
It's not a deal breaker.
One other thing that I am concerned about, and this is just a matter of all of us being disciplined, right, about, because we know what's on the assessment, is to not undermine the sampling plan, right? Because right now what we're doing is we're administering it at the very beginning, so there's no way to actually undermine the sampling plan because there's no faculty that are circulating through the rooms early on. If you know those 5 questions that are going to be sampled about the self-study material, yeah, like don't come in the room and be like, hey, number 2 is going to be, really about this topic. I hope you really reviewed that one good.
Well, that's where I do think there some format of student self-direction has to be created so that these questions that you're not done figuring out yet are ones that you ask about. And then we'll talk about whether they're on the test or not.
And that I think is a pro for doing like a pre-brief before you take the quiz, because you come in with the questions that you had about it and you don't know whether they're going to be on the quiz or not. So you list all the questions, you talk about it in your group, you talk about it with your clinical facilitator. If you have that still doesn't cover it, you can within that group session maybe have a content expert come into the room and explain that concept. Versus when we take the IRAD at the beginning, then we only end up debriefing those items, and we kind of end up focusing on those items and neglect things that were not talked about beforehand. So then that opens up the discussion more.
That's a good point, but then we have to imagine that all your content experts are going to be in all 4 rooms in the first half hour of every class.
It doesn't necessarily have to be within the first half hour. I mean, this is the way that I envisioned it, is that first half hour is protected time to get a list of questions. And then as you're going through the activities, you can, if like a group finishes early, we're like, oh, like we're so confused about this, like let's talk about this. So managing the time a little bit better. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that the content expert comes into the room at that exact time, because the way that it is now, we have questions and they come in later to address that.
That actually, that happens a lot.
It happens
pretty well. Like, Jordan Dale used to make a list on the board, and then I'd show up. I started purposefully leaving his room till like 2.5, 3 hours into the session, because I find I'd come in early and then I'd check back later and you guys would have more questions. So I started just only going late. And it was fine because they all kind of, when I walked in, they'd go, oh, okay, so we're confused about this, this, and this. And actually I found that the questions all tended to kind of cluster around the same major concept that was just confusing to them. So really, once they had asked all these questions, they had narrowed it down to, I'm confused about cytokines. They'd be like, okay, let's talk about cytokines. It wasn't actually three discrete issues. It was one that was a big misunderstanding.
We also talked about in terms of professionalism, what does it mean to be minimally prepared to participate in a case-based class? And we didn't, I mean, it wasn't the focus of our discussion, but we did kind of float the idea that the minimal preparedness that we expect is that you've gone over the material and understand it enough to ask a specific question about something that confuses you. Which I think if we set that expectation early as a professional expectation of you as a student, your job is to come in and have questions on the material that you were responsible for. I think that could work really, really well.
So if that's the case, could we ask the student body to, if you're gonna do that anyway, could we have it more in advance? So
like when people are going through the self-study material?
Right, so that we can more efficiently organize our approach to answering those questions across the various groups.
As long as the self-study guides go out in a timely manner, that should be no problem.
Not, when we get it 2 days in advance, we can't get through all of it.
Because my biggest concern with this proposal is the potential overwhelmingness of this pre-brief session and not being able to get around, if you will, to answer all those questions in a timely way, in a way that makes sense for what we need to cover. And I almost feel like we almost need a framework or something around that pre-brief session to make it a little more structured so it's not in every question. I mean, that's fine, I guess, but I guess, you know, maybe specifically start with the pastry questions, and if there are additional queries about questions that professionals didn't address already, maybe that's the first level of where we start. Since those are kind of representative of some of the key concepts anyway, then maybe drill down further. I just worry about those clinician educators thinking that they have to field all these questions by themselves. And even though we tell them that's not the case and we're here to help, they try to do that anyway. It's just the nature of when you're in the front of the classroom, you feel like you have to be large and in charge and you have to answer it. So my biggest concern is really with clinician educators, how they're gonna do that part of this process.
What are students going to be doing?
Not during, in the debrief, they will, not in the pre-brief.
It sounds like with this proposal, the devil's sort of in the details, right? Because there's a lot of operational stuff that could be pretty vexing. So are there a couple of course directors here who would be willing to work with our group to like pilot this out like in the next week or two?
Ideally, what I would like to do as somebody like early on, I want that first time, like the first case, I'd like ask Mike and Tom and Adam to go and sit in one of my rooms, and I'll be in one of the rooms to make sure that operationally this works. Because logistically, we saw with clinical educator training last year that there's training and then there's what happens when you get there, right? I mean, the military talks about that all the time. Like, there's all these plans, and then can you actually make it happen on the battlefield? And not that classrooms are a battlefield, but to a degree, I've spent a lot of time this year writing stage instructions into faculty guides. To some degree of success sometimes, and sometimes not. And a lot of times it depends on who the clinical educator in the room is. And if we're going to have a process like this, we at least need to make sure it gets off the ground on a like at least similar level, so that all the students at least understand as clinical educators rotate throughout the year.
So are you saying there's an opportunity somewhere coming up soon to pilot this? Or do you have some practice cases or something?
Pilots still
Well,
happening.
we still have 2 more clinical clinician educator training sessions, maybe the third, maybe when we get to the third one, try it there. I'm not sure about the second one, but maybe even the second one they could.
Okay, so it sounds like the part of this proposal that's absolutely
I
uncomfortable.
think actually we could do it for that, because we have pre-reading materials available. We can contact the students who are planning on coming to that session. and then we can put together what our script to the clinician educator would be, or kind of what we would think they should be prepared for. And you're the one discipline director that's involved in, right, so that, right, we kept it very watered down or limited, not watered down, because it's just a brief training session, and so, yeah, we could kind of pilot that.
So it sounds like the part of this proposal that's absolutely not controversial, and what the answer that we need today from that will impact your work as you're developing content over summer, that'll impact the student assessment team, and that'll impact the faculty assessment team, and you as you're creating items, is the decoupling of mastery questions from whatever form of in-session assessment that we have. Is everyone on the same page with that?
Because the point that they're making is really good, that, you know, we have the mastery questions, and those are big ticket items, but then there's a bunch of stuff that happens in the classes that, you know, we don't look at, assess, do anything with, as far as I can tell, unless it shows up on anything.
I think the decoupling is necessary. We heard from the very beginning from the minute you go to class and you take them off the script and off where the mastery questions were, that the class got lost. I can tell you there were a number of students that told me that when they didn't just study the mastery questions, they actually tried to treat the material the way it's supposed to be treated. It would be worse on the readiness assessments. So it's discouraging.
Also, educators throw students to the one part, the other, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I'm not opposed to decoupling, but I want us to think more intently about guidelines around that of sorts. How many questions should remain as mastery? How many of those can we still preserve as maybe some IRADs?
Those are all burnt through. So anything that we've released this year, we're just going to consider that burnt through.
Those are not secure.
No, those are IRADs. No, because those get released in the faculty guide all the time. But thankfully, we have a giant student assessment team. We have a faculty assessment team to help generate a new pool of items. The one thing that the beginning or end does impact is how they're going to be developing items. Right, because if it's on the front end, we can't include too much of the session, or really any of the session stuff in the blueprint. If it's at the end, we can include it in the blueprint. So, I mean, we can operate under conditions. We'll find another use for those if we generate the activity questions and we end up deciding to do it at the beginning and not at the end, I promise you we'll find another use for those activity questions, even as study questions that we release afterwards, or we'll put them on the readiness, or we'll put them on the formative assessments, right? So we'll over-generate items with an assumption that the blueprint for right now is going to include activity-based questions.
So one of the other things this relies on then is that the activities need to be done for you guys to write. Right. And that is.
We'll start on the other part.
That is part of the process that I don't think has fully fallen into place because there's a transition happening.
We have plenty to do, so we'll start on the part of the blueprint that's not that.
You're saying we have plenty to do, and I'm saying I need to have cellulitis posted next week.
Right.
So that's where it becomes an issue, because what'll happen is you'll get toward the end of summer and I'll need all of my IRADs done, and Tom will need all of his. And now all those IRADs are burnt. Not meaning, I feel like suddenly I went from like, hey, this is a great plan, to now I'm a Debbie Downer, but I'm a little concerned.
Wait, about what? Sorry, I'm confused. What are you?
So the post-case assessment will not be secure?
Yeah.
For review.
Yes, that's the idea.
It's a secure question, so technically you have to be written in advance, because all it does is
So some of us.
No, it's not right. You do not need it for the faculty guide.
Because we didn't have as much, we didn't have as many items to learn as so we could potentially use some of those.
In later blocks, that is true.
So, Maureen, what's your concern about workflow? I'm trying to understand. That the activities aren't developed, and so we can't develop items for the activities?
That's one.
Okay, so.
So activities are going to be developed over the summer. And like even for like the host defense, like Brett Williams is going through and finding low hanging fruit and rewriting activities as we speak. But you know, so I've got drafts that I can share, but nothing concrete. Well, cellular is. But then you guys are going to get to this point where the students need to go back to being students. And now all of the IRATs for Tom's block and VFG are burnt. And his activities were developed toward the late end of the summer. So you didn't have time to write questions for VFG. Tom's coming off of SNR.
Okay.
Who's gonna write these new IRAT items?
We're currently working, the student assessment team just today broke into groups to cover each of the blocks.
It's not you guys that are the problem.
Right, for specific IRAT questions. Right, so what I'm saying is even if we never see the activities that you guys are rewriting, replanning, half of the content will be ready for you by the end of the summer because we'll be producing it. Because it will be based on the self-study.
Whatever the new term is.
Yes, half of the items, at least half the items from the self-study material will have been generated. And if you get up like activities as they come out, then we can do that and catch up as much as we can.
So the other piece of that is, if the budget permits, and I think it does, is as we did with the previous M2 team, we'll offer you guys much reduced but extended employment through fall. And
the M2s?
Yeah, we did that and it worked great. They only did it through fall. Spring is a different story. And that was fine. They were just doing maybe like 5 hours a week here and there. If that fails, okay, we also still have you guys have been writing all these items, right? And under the gun, we have the faculty assessment team and we have the M4s. So more than, a lot of your stuff will be done. And so, yeah, I hear you, Maureen. I understand.
Don't forget that if workflow goes well, that all of that time you were busy during the course on trying to get course materials and everything ready at the last minute will already be done. And so all you'll have to be worrying about, if anything, once the course starts, is generating these questions if they haven't all been.
Well, actually, generating M2 content too. I mean, because like, I'm gonna get Tom and probably Chris done this summer, but, sorry, Mike.
We're talking about 10-question quiz.
Yeah.
A typical case.
So across 9 cases, that's 90 items.
Yeah, but a typical
No, we would have
That's 45.
Exactly. A typical case for what quiz will have path on, path quiz. It is.
All right, if a whole room of people is like, Maureen, chill out, this is totally fine.
Yeah, Maureen, you're
I'll
gonna
chill
have
out.
to deal with it.
I was fine to talking now.
Well, Maureen, the nice thing is that
I feel like I have that effect on you.
Maureen, the other thing is that because these are going to be secure, and presumably because they're secure, we won't be burning for them. It means that we can write them higher quality and maintain a pool and expand the pool over the
The
years.
higher quality that makes me nervous. I can turn out an IRAD in 30 seconds. A high quality question, give me an hour.
Are these still too expensive?
One.
One.
That's open for, everything's open for discussion. This was the most pressing issue because a lot of people's workflows depended on it.
This is something we really, because we know we're gonna have formative.
I mean,
That format is not gonna, we know that's not gonna change much, the summary is not gonna change much.
So I'm in favor of piloting this to see how it functions from a
I'll work with Tom, hopefully we can do that. Despite how that goes, I would express my strong preference to go this way, just based on 2 things. One thing, really. What we experienced from the last year, the way we did it this last year, I thought did not work well. It engendered behaviors on part of the students. And again, it's no fault of your own. You only respond in the most logical way to the pressure put on you. And that led you to engage in behaviors that were really not very constructive for your own education. So we know that just did not work well, did not have the outcome for you that it should have. And although it will be, I think, a challenge for us, I think doing what you propose is going to be much more effective in keeping you engaged as students in the classroom activity. When I think of a sort of worst case behavior scenario, I'd rather have a student sitting there and studying content when hopefully they would have done that before they got in class to be able to do well on that quiz, than doing what we did this year and then going off and looking at their email or YouTube or YouTube. Right, because you know what?
Now they'll just be showing up late.
Because really, once they're ready to.
But those are some of the logistics we need to work out in a pilot, right? Like, how do we get people to show up on time?
They can sort of like.
No, I mean, I agree with it,
When
I'm
do we
just
fit in
scared.
there?
I have an idea about time and evals. What about the beginning of the session, the eval course that they just had?
Oh, that actually would solve something that
That
we
would
were talking
solve a lot of
about.
problems.
That actually solves a lot for us.
Look at that.
We were talking about how, because we were measuring right at the end of session, students tend to be overreactive and emotional and whatever. And so if we increase that lag by just a little bit and protecting the eval time by lagging one
The very
session.
first session of the vlogs, but the rest of the time they won't be able to do it because they have to have.
You're brilliant. Thank you.
We
That's
only have
it.
5 minutes left,
Yeah.
so do you have all the decisions you?
Everything we need to start working on, like we need to pilot this and work out all the bugs, but for item development purposes, I think we have all the information we need.
Well, why not?
All right, so I just want to talk in 5 minutes since. That's all we have.
That's something really important.
So I sent everybody your objectives. I went through every single study guide and pulled the objectives out. And I tried to categorize them on the frameworks that we had designed together. Some of you have worked on them, some of you haven't. Please do this because this is going to serve a couple of different functions. First of all, the CCE has to approve all of our curriculum, meaning they have to go through everything and say, why are you teaching this, why are you not teaching this, right? This is your chance to put in what you think are the nominees for what you think should be taught, right? They may not win, whatever this lottery is, but at least you know. Also, put inside there anything that you think you might teach in the future, too, because this is going to be the framework that we're going to use. This same framework is going to then be tagged to the curriculum inventory, it's going to be tagged to the assessments, it's going to be tagged to, so that we can see, we spent 4 hours teaching, head and neck anatomy, we spent 12 hours teaching this, microbiology, such and such thing, because we need to do that. This needs to have been done like 3 months ago. So if you do not do it, I'm going to have to make stuff up. You don't want me to do that because I don't know what I'm talking about, right? So please look at this stuff and put things in.
So what happened in my role is, so we had a great conversation several weeks ago, and then I was expecting, I guess, an email from you with deadlines and a reminder of what we were supposed to do, and I should have reached out to ask for that.
So I sent you your objectives.
Right, I had the objectives, but I couldn't remember what I was supposed to do with those objectives, in what way.
There's instructions on top. Your stuff
Were
is
they on top? Okay.
Your stuff is actually, if you're good with your objectives, I think it's in pretty good shape. Okay. Yours is already designed the way it should be. Here's what I need to see, because we also want to give this to the students so they know what am I responsible for, right? Over the course of all 4 years, really, but then we're going to use that same material just for the M1 year and 2 year and 3 years. So if I have to know what specifically am I going to learn about endocarditis? The other thing that it lets us do is if Maureen is teaching endocarditis and so is Anne and so is Joanna, we don't all want to be teaching the same thing over and over again. We need to start collaborating. That's, I think, one of the big things we need to do. We need to be able to see what other people are teaching. So
when you need this, what's our deadline?
That maybe it might have been like 3 months ago. So I'm gonna what is it, July
30th.
End of the week, next week.
Yeah, the inventory is
So what's gonna happen is, so a lot of your stuff I put in there, but it doesn't make sense. So make sure you look at each objective and put them in the categories you want. There may be things that you think you don't need or things you think that, oh, there's stuff missing. Please put all that in. Because this is really important for the LCD, it's really important for the way that we're going to design the curriculum and tag everything, generate dashboards and all that stuff.
Thank you for organizing, Bob.
No, thank you guys. All right, sorry the fire alarm took all your time.
We probably needed a break.
Oh, last question before we all leave. Do we need another session like this before the end of the summer? So
Sooner rather than
please
later.
send me topics that you would like to cover for another session like this. and then we'll try and work with you to get something more.
So we didn't get to that.
Well, give me the specific, well, the only true topic that we didn't get to was the.
Just stuff that's gonna come up, you know what I mean? Even just the I was in Adam's thing, but honestly, I think it's something that I should cover at a course directors meeting anyway.
Okay.
And at most, maybe keep them.
It's just a networking meeting where we're all in this nice room, right? So we're all together and we can have, maybe a few topics, spend an hour to meet up and discuss things.
Specific topics I'm going to be in, I'll get students to start trying to find the.
Or what else does it cause?
Oh, it's into a question mark. I had asked, is the life assessment like a fluent?
No, it's like a quiz.
It's like a
It's a quiz. And on the session.
Okay.
For that specific session, not for like the quiz, right?
Oh, okay.
Like everything with us is packaged, right? They get a package of self-study materials, and then often it's self-study material, we have session activities. So the assessment is an assessment just at the beginning.
Next level.
I remember in grad school, we used to be years
Thank
So I was like, I'm gonna eventually figure out how to get upstairs myself. So I'm like, you should do it now. She's like, yeah, mine is like, so getting here. So I don't currently live in, yeah, I don't currently live in, you know, maybe we're around. And so we just don't have that. Or no, it's not. And I'm like, yeah, usually been to the. And I have to at least until like. Just for